Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Brad Musil and welcome back to Experimenting with Existence, Episode 1, Strategy Board Games. As I mentioned at the end of the previous video, or at the end of Part 4, I realized that after going through Parts 1 through 4, the episode was going to be very long. And so I thought it best then to divvy it up into two distinct videos. And so in this video, we'll move on then to Parts 5 through 8. And starting with then Part 5 here, where we'll take a much closer in-depth look at my own designs of strategy board games. So I'll start by a discussion and sort of general reflections on my history designing strategy board games and kind of what the design process looks like. Of course, that's changed a little bit over the years, but I'll elaborate on, again, my history designing strategy board games and kind of what the design process looks like. And then I thought it would be cool or interesting to take a deeper dive, a closer look at some of the games that I've designed. And I kind of went with a three-pronged strategy in terms of that, if you will. So I'm going to start by kind of discussing some philosophy-related games that I've designed, and we'll take a closer look at one in particular called The Cave of Ignorance. And then I'll also kind of take a closer look at some of the games that I would consider to be the most polished or publishable and what tend to also be then my favorites. So there's probably a reason why my favorites are the most publishable and polished because I tend to spend probably more time on them. But we'll take a closer look at what I consider to be some of the better games that I've designed. And then I'll conclude this part by discussing my most recent designs, a couple in particular. So that's the game plan here for Part 5. Without further ado then, I'll go ahead and, like I mentioned, talk a little bit about kind of my history designing games and what that process of designing a game, or at least for me, what that process looks like. So I've suggested this earlier in previous parts that I pretty much started designing these games, strategy board games, when I first discovered and started playing them. So way back, again, what was that, 2007, 2008, when I first started playing Settlers of Catan, I immediately started thinking about, what if this rule was different in my mind? I was immediately hooked not only with playing those games, but then, I'd start to get all these ideas. Well, that would be a cool theme for a game. I haven't really seen that done yet, or that would be an interesting way to handle this part of the game. What happens if I explore that more? And so, again, almost immediately I started actually tinkering with making my own games. And so, again, what is my history goes all the way back to the beginning of when I started really playing these strategy board games. So, what is it about? And I've already alluded to some of this in previous parts, but what is it about designing these strategy board games that is so compelling for me? I've always been, a very creative person, I'd say, one who needs his creative outlets, whether that's, playing guitar or writing fiction, or in this case, designing strategy board games. I, again, like to just imagine stuff and then go with it, right? And let it unravel and see what happens. And so strategy board games are awesome for that, especially, and I've kind of hinted at this in previous parts as well, especially given that the design process, if you're going to make a good board game, entails another love of mine or another thing I've had a knack for, and that's math, right? And if you're going to make a well-balanced game, you need to have sort of a solid grip on math and think about those sorts of elements. And so, again, sort of the ability to satisfy those creative urges of mine, and also kind of that innate sort of appeal to one's mathematical abilities in the design process. Those both were kind of, I think, factors that drew me into designing games. And I think one of the reasons why, it sort of jived with my personality. So hopefully that kind of came across somewhat adequately there. I also like the puzzle, kind of like, imagining the possibilities, but then like fleshing them out and making a nice polished product in the end, if you will. Something that makes sense and that's genuinely fun. That is a kind of puzzle, if you will, that can be challenging at times, especially depending on how, what sort of theme you're dealing with and how intricate you want to be in terms of representing that theme. right? That can be a challenge because you don't want to get too bogged down and, with layers and layers of rules and details. So that's a fine line, right? And that's just one of the many things you have to wrestle with in the design process. And I enjoy that. It's kind of like a mental challenge. And again, I really enjoy the freedom to explore all these various possibilities, all these various themes, and I kind of exercise my imagination in designing these games. So a little bit more about the history. It goes all the way back to, I guess I should say, I started off creating all kinds of games. I should have had my kind of list, and I'll probably, maybe show a list here in a little bit. But I started off designing games sort of religiously, and that was pretty much the case up until maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And no surprise here, right? My kids started getting older and older, and at that point, I think it really, what is so the point is, like, my output, so to speak, has dramatically declined, say 4 or 5 years ago, and I think that's probably solely due to my kids being older and demanding more of my time. No knock on them. It is what it is. My point here mostly is that, it's not due, my decline in output is not due to like a lack of motivation or interest, in strategy board games, right? I still have it. It's still there. It's just because of practical considerations, right? I don't have the output, so to speak, that I used to. So I think that's worth pointing out. My history of designing these games goes all the way back to the beginning when I started first, playing them. But my output, right, has declined sort of precipitously here in the last 4 or 5 years. So what exactly does the design process look like? What does designing a strategy board game, what is that like for me? And, first thing I guess I would say is that this is admittedly probably a different process for, each designer. Although I'm willing to bet there's probably some sort of characteristics or features that are common to most strategy board game designers out there. I'd be interested to sort of see if there was a study ever done on designers. But, so I can only speak for me and kind of how the process is for me. I've alluded to before, in prior parts to this episode and other videos, that I have a very obsessive personality. You can probably figure that out, based on how long this very episode is, right? I warned you we would be taking a very deep dive into strategy board games. So it shouldn't be a surprise, right? But the point here is that, I'm very obsessive when it comes to the things that I find, interesting. And so playing and then also designing strategy board games are no exception. So when I get an idea, in my mind, this is particularly true back, before my kids were much older to the point where they are now. When they were younger, this was especially true. The point is, when I had more time, they would be like, when I would get an idea, that is seemingly all I could think about until I got it sort of out of my system, until I completely purged it from my system. I thank my wife for sort of putting up with that, because I would, and sometimes be locked up in the basement, getting it out, and that would be very time consuming. And she would, fortunately be very understanding. And so I described it to her as precisely that, right? It's a kind of an obsession. I've talked to a few others about it, too. And I'm sure, again, I'm not alone when it comes to designers. This is probably the case for, many other designers out there. That's like, you get an idea, it's sort of one thing leads to another. And then all of a sudden that's morning, noon, and night. That's all you can think about, right? And this particular facet of the design, and then this, and then you have your mind going on like 8 different tangents too. Or at least, again, when it comes to me, I'll be thinking about it on my, as I'm exercising, on my runs, all I can think about. And so, general point is, it's a obsessive sort of process. Now, I kind of intimated, that's kind of changed over the years as the kids have gotten older, because I can't just lock myself up in the basement until the game's done, right? I have to take them to school and so on and so forth. So it is interesting how that has changed a little bit, and how earlier in my design career, this would generally be the case, right? A game, as soon as I'd start working on it, it would be do until it was done. Whereas the last few designs for the past 4 or 5 years, that's not the case. Probably due for the most part to practical considerations. Again, older kids and so on that demand more of my attention. That's not the case, and I've tinkered on these designs, these recent designs, for years at a time. So it's, I was just reflecting on that, preparing for this episode, how it is a little bit different these last few games. Again, no doubt due to practical considerations, right? But in general, I would say when it comes to the design process, and even recently when I'm working on my designs, granted they might take longer to flesh out. When I am working on them, it's an obsessive process, right? And so I just wanted to hammer that point home, that it really is. And thank you again for putting up, right? Thanks again to my wife for putting up with that, especially early on in my design career. What else? I guess I would just generally say, so designers, sometimes they talk about, like, do they tend to start with theme or mechanic first? And really, I've had both happen, right? I would say I tend to have like a theme in mind first, and kind of then, how can I best represent the theme, right? Through what kind of mechanics, and but sometimes, I'll have an idea for kind of an interesting or novel sort of way of playing a game, or an interesting or novel mechanic, and so maybe it starts with that. So in terms of what I tend to start with, it can vary. But regardless, like I said, once I start going, I tend to then, it's a spiraling sort of process where I become sort of it becomes all consuming, and a lot of times it's all I can think about. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of like literally how I make the game. So, on the one hand, there's the rules. So for most of the games I've designed, at least the early ones that I've completely fleshed out, all right, versus some of these more recent ones which have drug on for years. I'll have complete rules for most of them, and then also, additional, like maybe game summary cards or components made, and then also the board. So one of the things I'll do is like go through and show some of the boards that I've created over the years. All right, here's the fantasy football board, all kinds of different boards that I've made over the years, right, for all these games. So that gets into sort of the prototypes, right? So I've had to, once I get kind of most of the rules fleshed out generally, then it's time to kind of put it into reality, I guess, right? You've got to like construct the actual game so that people can play it, right? And that's what we mean by then the prototype. And I'll allude to this in the next part when I get into what it was like entering the 2010 Rio Grande design competition. I think, my prototypes always consisted more or less of these foam boards and like Microsoft Word images or images, it didn't have any kind of art. They're very rudimentary, and I think that might have been, I'll get into it, but versus all the other competitors, so to speak, or the other entrants of that design competition, that might have been the sort of the differentiating factor. I've often wondered about it anyway. So I try to be, as neat as I can be when it comes to this stuff, right? I like to spend more time on the design process, not like fine-tuning and making a perfect prototype. But so in general, right, I just want to come up with something that can be kind of playable. And so most often they'll just consist of like these foam boards. Oftentimes, I should say, not most often, but oftentimes. So then, otherwise, I'll try to do one thing that I've kind of fine-tuned over the years. I'll definitely say I've gotten better at kind of streamlining things, thinking in terms of a publisher and how a publisher would think about things, right? Trying to minimize the components whenever possible, minimizing the number of cards. Do I really need 30 cards, or can I represent the same ratios and represent the same part of the theme by going down to 18 or something like that? So, that's one thing I've kind of appreciated and gotten better and better at over the years. So, American Numismatist, one of my games, the game actually that I submitted to the Rio Grande design competition, it started off with the foam board. Actually, I might have even pulled it up. But, over the years, I've fine-tuned it to where I think you could, like, get it into a much smaller box, which then is cheaper for publishers, right? So if you just have these little smaller boards, rather than require this huge big board, you can pack it up into a smaller sort of area. So, my components, my prototypes over the years, I still use, right, just things I can print off here. Again, I'm more interested in the design, ultimately, that part of the whole process, not the coming up with the best prototype possible, the production aspect. But that's kind of how I've always done things, I guess, in general. Just wanted to speak a little bit or about, what it's like then making these prototypes. So I'll go to craft stores and pick up component pieces then, right? Because you need various pieces to play these games, right? So, by the way, the stack of folders here is basically the rules for my 50 plus games that I've designed over the years, at least the ones that I have sort of mostly finished rules for. But yeah, I have all these components that I've acquired, usually at craft stores and so on. And here's all the components for one of the games we'll get into in a little bit more detail later in this part. But notice how, again, it can be packaged up into a very small sort of box if necessary, right? If it ever comes to actually being published. So again, that was a little blurb on prototypes and kind of how I've fine-tuned making them, I guess. And although some things, like I said, I'm still designing, some things remain the same, right? I'm still using foam boards or, designing things entirely through Microsoft Word and what I can do through Word and so on. But, here's just a glimpse of another sort of component. This is for one of my most recent designs. It's kind of like a Magic the Gathering-esque, and we'll get into more detail in terms of it at the end of this part, but kind of a Magic the Gathering-esque game with different colors that do sort of have different flavors and different effects. The cards do, and so again, just another quick glimpse at sort of components for games. These are actually the cards for that same game, just to give you an idea of what this stuff looks like in general. Again, we'll take a much closer look at some of these games in particular here in a moment. So I mentioned this, but just in general, I've definitely gotten better at refining sort of the game design in general. So in addition to not only like thinking more and more in terms of if I were a publisher, right, and marketing these games, how to make them, the cheapest in terms of making them. Another way I've gotten better and better is sort of streamlining the rules. So it's funny, preparing for this, I went back and looked at the very first game I made, and the rules are like super lengthy, right? And so that's, again, something I've had in mind more and more as the years have gone on is who likes to sit down? I mean, some of us gamers do, but who wants to sit down and be inundated with details and rules? So I've tried to become better and better at emulating the Wolfgang Kramers of the world, right? And making designs that have fewer and simpler rules while nevertheless offering the same sort of depth in gameplay. And I think I've gotten better at that over the years. I guess that would be, my general ability as a game designer. Now, having said that, though, now, of course, this is just my family and friends. I remember, play sessions and playing my very first design with them and then enjoying that game, even though there was, and actually I meant to show it, even though, all right, here's the board. I wanted to show the board for it super quick. This was the very first game. This is the board for the very first game that I designed, Race to the White House, I think I called it. So not only were the rules bigger, the board was bigger as well. And shout out to one of my friends, Daniel Davis. He helped me construct that board. I actually remember, 15 years ago in this very basement, working on that, him sort of sketching that out. He's got way more artistic talent than I do. But anyway, so just in general, at least in my humble opinion or not so humble opinion, I think I have gotten better at those two things in general, right? Sort of streamlining the components and making my games more publishable from a publisher's perspective, and then also streamlining the rules. And I guess in some sense, making my designs better in and of themselves. Yeah, so that's that. The games that take in general, so kind of going along with that theme of making them simpler and streamlining them a bit. They tend to take less time to play nowadays. So yeah, they enjoyed playing Race to the White House, but it was a 2.5 hour game, whereas most of my games, my more recent designs, tend to be an hour or less. So just a general tendency or thing that's true, I guess. Not always the case. I guess that's kind of it in terms of general reflections on the design process and my history, in terms of designing these strategy games, what it looks like and so on. So I thought, to end this part, of course, this will be actually very extensive as well. I wanted to then take a closer look at some of the designs, right? So we'll begin by taking a look at then some of specifically the philosophy-related designs that I've had over the years. So that's the game plan now. So as promised, we'll now take a closer look at some of my designs, beginning with some that I would consider more philosophy-related, moving on to then some that I consider most publishable or polished, or in many respects my favorite designs, with the small caveat that I'll save American Numismatist for the next part 6, when I discuss my submission of that game to the 2010 Rio Grande design competition. And then but otherwise I'll talk about most of my favorite designs in a little bit more detail, and then we'll wrap up this part by talking a little bit more about a couple of my most recent designs. So we'll begin here by, as I mentioned, talking briefly about some of my philosophy-related designs over the years. And so there's really 3 of them, having gone back and surveyed my catalog, if you will. There's 3 of them, going all the way back to my 3rd design, and then number 12 I pulled out, and then what is it 36 is the Cave of Ignorance, and I'll actually save that. We'll take a much closer look at the Cave of Ignorance because I consider it one of my more polished and promising designs. But I'll talk briefly here at the outset about the other 2 then. So the first one is the Philosopher Kings. It's called Philosopher Kings. Again, it's the 3rd one I designed. And so it was Race to the White House, then Space Race, as a space game that I designed, and then 3rd was Philosopher Kings. You can already tell plenty of stuff there in terms of components. There's different decks and different sorts of cards and so on. So a lot thicker rule book, you might say, versus some of my more recent designs. But nevertheless, I remember my friend Daniel in particular. He's for better or worse been one of my routine play testers over the years. I remember him, commenting throughout the years how much he remembered liking this particular game. So it might have been a little heavier or more detailed, but nonetheless, maybe there's something to it. So what was pretty cool, so I went back, and I have to say, it's been a long time since I've gone back and looked at some of this stuff. So this one, I noticed we were playing this in 2010. We play tested this, and so I was going back and preparing for this, and one of the cooler things I noticed was like what you end up doing is you begin the game by creating your quote unquote ideal image, which is you spelling out. Of course, probably a lot of this isn't very familiar to most of us if we don't have a history in philosophy, but you kind of spell out certain sort of areas of philosophy you want to focus on or become an expert in. And then the idea is how you win the game is you sort of actualize that ideal image and bring it to reality, if you will. So that's kind of the general gist of the game. Unlike most of my initial designs, it didn't have a board for a board, and so I didn't use a foam board. Instead, you would lay out at the beginning, you would set out, this would be the board, this deck, and you would set these out randomly for the most part, and they're like different countries where then you can go and sort of become experts on certain things that those countries historically have been affiliated with philosophically. So again, there's a fair amount of research that went into this game. Now, granted, a lot of these philosophy games, or these philosophy games that I've made, I already know a bunch about philosophy, but there was still a considerable amount of research that went into, for example, this one. That's the other thing that kind of stood out as I went back and looked into some of this stuff, is just how much, recall just how much time I did spend kind of like, probably a lot of it, went way overboard, but, the all necessary information guide and how much time I spent just creating some of this. But lots going on here. And again, a lot of it entailed a lot of research and, finding out where these historical figures, where were they born, and what exactly what years did they do their thing, so to speak. So lots of research, a lot of time went into this one, and I'll probably just show you some clips here through the computer itself of some of these documents. But that's Philosopher Kings. Again, that was the third one I ever designed. So I don't know. Again, it's been a long time, but here's some of these cards that I then made for the game. Pretty basic cards here, I'd say, but yeah, anyway, that is Philosopher Kings. Then another one I pulled out. Now this one isn't philosophy per se, but it's reflective of my time studying philosophy, and insofar as it's called academia, as insofar as it deals with going to school, studying to become a philosophy instructor, and then becoming an instructor. So, or I shouldn't say necessarily philosophy instructor, an instructor in general. Sadly, this piece came off, but this was the board for academia. I'll try to show you a little closer. I don't know how much you can see there, but lots to this game. I did different schools, different made-up schools that you could sort of apply to and try to get jobs at, and they had harder and more difficult to get the job. You need harder credentials. You need, what's the word I'm looking for? You had to have better credentials. It's one way to put it. They were either public or private, so there's distinguishing factors. You might be better suited to apply for public schools or private schools, so on and so forth. This year's job openings, this semester's conferences, so there's different things you can do. So you're trying to, you're trying to become like the most renowned, most prestigious, I guess. There's the prestige points board or tracker, trying to become the most renowned instructor out there. And so you can publish books and publish journal articles. Just bringing back so many memories of when what it was like making this. And you can have, so one of the things, you're teaching philosophy, right? You might have be a more strict grader or a more lenient grader, and then either way it's going to have certain effects on gameplay. So what else? Do you prefer private or public institutions? You have to pick this, and so then it's going to have consequences in terms of gameplay. You can pick either private or public, or you can be neutral, in which you won't get any positives or benefits. So that's again over here. So at the beginning of the game, and I can't remember if throughout the game you can sort of adapt that or not, but change it or not, but you pick sort of your teaching philosophy, and again, depending on what it is, you'll have, unless it's neutral, in which case you won't have, there goes another one, you won't have positives or negatives if you pick neutral, or what is it? Yeah, neutral, it says. One of them says average, so it depends on the descriptor, but depending on your philosophy in each of these, what are there, 4 categories, then it's going to have various positives and negative effects. So subject taught, so you pick your profession, right? You start off as a lowly GTA, work your way up to lecturer, assistant professor, and then associate professor. Pick a subject: engineering, psychology, economics, history, physics, chemistry, math, English, marketing, or geography. Where is philosophy? Have to appeal to the masses, right? So then, you have assigned grade cards, which determine whether you have any problems with your students at the end of the semester, each semester, and of course your strictness in terms of your grading philosophy or teaching philosophy will affect that as well, whether you have these problems with students at the end of each semester. If you're an instructor, you can relate, right? We had a quick reference card here for this game. I'll show you there. And so with this game, you remember it's like you kind of secretly plan each semester. So here's an example. This would be your player board, and you secretly plan. You have a certain number of cubes which you use to then allot to doing these certain things, and that's in secret. Then you reveal your plans for that semester at the same time and carry those out in various ways. So going way back, sort of show you, what the design process is like. Again, a lot of times, if I have it in my head, I just gotta get it out as quick as possible. So, granted, it sucks to have to then take this and get it into the computer where it's saved in a safer sense, right? Who knows what's going to happen if I just jot it down on a piece of paper, especially with kids running around. But sometimes I don't want to run, or my computer's not accessible, or I don't want to run and grab it. It's just easier just to jot something down on paper. So like you can see when I was first like plotting out, and I talked about their teaching. When you play the game, you pick your teaching philosophy with respect to these various aspects of teaching. And this was me sort of, again, figuring that out and drawing that up for the first time. You can have administrative problems, number of students complaining about professor formality. So anyway, that's a closer look at game number 12, chronologically, Academia. And now we'll take an even closer look at number 36, the Cave of Ignorance, because I consider it, so what I did was try to pick out, so for this next segment, this is kind of a segue, I guess, because it has to do with philosophy. This game number 36, the Cave of Ignorance, has to do with philosophy, but then it's also the theme of this next section of part 5. This is getting complicated. It also is one of my top 10, I guess. So I think my top 10 sort of publishable or most polished, and in some sense then favorite designs. And so this made the top 10, but it's also philosophy related. So I thought I would start that then by discussing in more detail than the Cave of Ignorance. So let's do that now. Let's preface our closer look at, some of my better designs by taking a look at where I keep, the components, the boards themselves, and, the rules and other paper-related documents to these games. So first, I have this cabinet in my basement, which stores then all of, for the most part, the rules to these various games, and, notes I might have from play testing, whatever I can fit in a file folder, I try to get in there. And then I have, as we'll see here in a moment, the anything that can't fit in these file folders, I'll put into like a baggie and store that separately then. And then the boards, if there's actually like a bigger board, that's an entirely different matter, as we'll see here in a moment. So for the most part, I keep my components in in their own distinct bags then within this tub, unless I'm playing a particular game, then in which case I might keep the components out. But otherwise, generally, I keep them stored in this tub. So looks like most of the games for, games 41, and in other words, so I keep my games numbered by, chronologically in terms of when I created them. So this would be games 41 on. Although there's 16, the board for 16 sitting in that bag, so I don't know what happened over the years, but you can see then, all the different components that are needed. Ready to go by bag and by number, or whatever I'm trying to say here. Battle dice, just endless components. They tended to be in order for the most part by number here. Survival of the Fittest, that's one I actually worked on with my son. Kind of interesting game. Like that, but just all sorts of components. These games would be the earlier ones, so probably lots more. I told you right over. You can just tell over the years I've fine-tuned that, and so in general I have fewer and fewer components. Right, but anyway, that's where I store my components for the most part. As for my boards, for the most part, other than my initial couple of designs, maybe 2 of the first 4, let's say, insofar as they have a board, right, and require like a foam board, then I'll keep them in these big garbage sacks. I'll have another one over top this, so in case, keep them here in the basement, in case we have a flood or whatever, I try to keep them as protected as possible, because again, a lot of work went into these, but I'll keep keep them then in here. I'll just give you a quick glimpse at some of these different ones. This is the board for band manager, where you put together different bandmates, try to form bands out of them, and all the musicians in the game are based off real historical musicians. These are not going to show up as well. Explorers, that was like a sort of like similar to Catan in a way. This is another version of band manager's board. I think that was a later iteration. In theory, a better one. So I'll get into American Numismatist here in a little bit. And that's a sports card version of the same game. Then I took, instead of coins, you go around and collect and sell sports cards. This is a game called The American Dream, where you pick different occupations, different properties in different areas. It's one of the probably the crappiest looking ones I have, but I had so much detail I had to try to get on here. Different areas of the city, some were, what's the word I'm looking for? More rundown than others, and so on and so forth. You're trying to kind of build your way up in society, if you will, or whatever angle you want to take. There's different ways you can win the game. Anyway, that's that one. And here's another one. I won't get into as much of the detail like I did there. There's another earlier version of the American Numismatist board. I don't know. That's a blank one. It's also fairly irrelevant. Here's Psych Ward, Space Race. This is the board for game number 2 that I made. And what else? This is Medieval Mayhem's board. Oops. That's the sea area, and you have different lands, randomized resource, victory points, and so on at each territory at the beginning of the game. Again, I won't go into these in too much detail. Just wanted to kind of show the general boards for a lot of these, especially the ones that I won't go into more detail on. This is like a kind of Western exploration game. There's different paths with different sort of characteristics and risk factors, and you can buy and upgrade your equipment and so on and so forth. What else do we have in here? Microbrewin, that's one we'll discuss more. Academia's board. This is kind of like the Oregon Trail, my version of going west during that time period. You can stick to the green, more traveled path, and it's safer, less hazards, but it won't be as quick either. So you can venture and make it quicker if you go through some of the orange and red, but then you run the risk of encountering stronger foes, worse wild animals, so on and so forth. It's different, historical forts involved. Landmark locations, and if you go to some of those that are out of the way, you can get bonus points. So I just went on that one way longer than I intended. That might be all I want to show here. The football one, we'll get into that in more detail. Anyway, so yeah, keep the boards in there. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of these games. All right, so I've got the Cave of Ignorance set up on the table. Every component and so on, the rules, and this is number 36. In turn, it's chronologically, so this is the 36th one that I created. I thought I would kind of begin before I take a closer look at some of the gameplay elements. I'd begin by kind of just reading, I guess, the overview that I include in the rules. So, in the Cave of Ignorance, you embark on a quest for truth, seeking to find your way out of the Cave of Ignorance. Fortunately, you are not alone. Thanks to Plato's Academy, which attracts some of the greatest philosophers of all time, you will be able to solicit help from the likes of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. You will encounter thinkers from every philosophical era, each exhibiting their own set of unique views and specialties. However, be sure to only invite those with enlightened views to express them, as preaching ignorance will only set you back. Take note of the views expressed by those around you too, as these will also affect your search for enlightenment. You will need to properly assess and use each philosopher's strengths to your advantage if you desire to maximize your potential. Will you display the clever tactics and strategic foresight needed to escape the Cave of Ignorance? Will you prove to be the wisest once the path of enlightenment is completely revealed? So that is intended to kind of give you a taste for what you're getting into with the Cave of Ignorance. So if any of you are familiar with Plato and specifically his Republic, there's a famous allegory of the cave where the philosopher begins down in the depths of the cave, sort of deceived by all sorts of illusions, the shadows from the fire behind them that is creating these shadows on the cave, which they mistakenly think is all that's real, right? That's their construal of reality is based on these shadows, basically. And then the idea is the philosopher breaks free of the chains, gets slowly out of the cave, and exits and is enlightened, sees the sun and the good for what it is. And so there's this additional sort of aspect going on in Plato, and that's the idea, well, then does the philosopher have an obligation to descend back down into the cave and enlighten the others? There's some debate about that. We won't get into that too much, but that is kind of setting, I guess, gives you a little bit of a background in terms of what the game's all about. So I tried to emulate kind of that feel with the game. So there's ultimately 10 rounds, typically. If you get a certain card played in the game, that might change. But, each round you're revealing another, what they're called are view cards. You start the game knowing one. So in this instance, so the idea is the whole this is called the path of enlightenment. So each round you're going to reveal another view on the path of enlightenment. And that's the idea is it's thought to represent sort of the ultimate truth. So all these views are the correct ones, if you will. So you start sort of knowing that social contract is on the path of enlightenment. And so you're ultimately trying to get as many. So I guess the general idea is you're sort of a school of philosophy, and you are, thanks to Plato's Academy and the philosophers you'll encounter, you're sort of trying to attract the enlightened philosophers. So in other words, the philosophers, let's take a look at our hand here. You start with 3 cards. The philosophers who express views that end up being on the path of enlightenment at the end of the game. And of course, that's going to change every game, so social contract may or may not be in the game. Right, it happened to be in this mock setup here. But so again, the idea is throughout the game, then you're going to be playing cards, in your tableau. Some of them face down, some of them face up, and the ones that are placed face up, the idea is that philosopher is expressing, right? Albert Camus is one of ours. So let's say on our first turn, we decided to, I forgot what I called it specifically, but, let's say he's giving a lecture, right? That's the idea. And then he's expressing his views from that point forward. So if this card is still face up at the end of the game, then I'm either going to, I will get points for either any of these 3 views that are on his card, if they end up on the path of enlightenment. If they don't show up, then I'll actually lose points. So for each one that doesn't show up, I'll lose 2 points. But if it does show up somewhere on here, again, you're going through each of them, if they're on there, then you get the points corresponding to whichever tile they're on, right? So the later in the game they come up, the later rounds, the more those are going to be worth. So that's the general sort of idea. Again, you start with 3 cards in your hand, as do all your opponents, and sort of the first thing you do then is you will all simultaneously put one of your cards. Well, actually, the first thing you do is reveal the next view, which in this case happens to be capitalism. Right, so we know that at the end, now there are various cards that could change this, but usually right at the end, and actually there's only one philosopher in the game that will score you points for capitalism, and that's Adam Smith. So you'll notice that for each different view, the game tells you, or the card tells you how many philosophers in the game, right, correspond to that. So at the end, if you have Adam Smith, if he has given a lecture or expressed his views at your school, and in other words, he's face up in your tableau, well, then you're going to get, in this case, 1 point. But had this been somewhere up here, you get those corresponding points. Now, on the other hand, let's say you had Adam Smith, but capitalism wasn't anywhere on the path of enlightenment, then you would lose 2 points. Okay, so it actually is possible to lose points, to finish with, in fact, a negative total. And in fact, the winner could have a negative total. So you'll notice the scoreboard up here, there's actually, you can go negative. All right, let's say it was a really bad game. The players didn't do too well, in the sense that the players didn't do too well, and they have a bunch of, all the players have a bunch of philosophers face up in their tableau who have none of their views really represented on the path of enlightenment. Well, they're going to get a lot of negatives in, and it might be the case that you have a super low scoring game. And that scoring sort of dynamic is one of the things that I really liked about this game. But anyway, so we set up at the beginning of the round. Each round you turn over the next one. Then players all pick one of their cards from their hand. So these are the 3 that I have. Let's say and you select one of them to play that round, and you put it face down. Then everybody reveals. And actually, I should have backed up. Right after you reveal the round card, you actually turn over. Let's say this is a 3-player game. You turn over a number of philosophers on Plato's Academy equivalent to the number of players. Right? So here we have Plato, Karl Marx, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And so these 3 cards are going to be the ones available for players to acquire then during this round as well. So going back to the card I played, everybody else is going to have played a card as well. The person who plays the highest ranked philosopher, which would be Aristotle, is number 1, and then they're all ranked. So all 90 philosophers in the game are ranked from 1 to 90. Whoever has the highest ranked one, right, beginning with Aristotle, that Plato happened to have been drawn there too. So let's say Aristotle, somebody played Aristotle. They'd take their turn first, right? So they can then do one of a few things on their turn. I told you one of them, right? They could say, I'm going to have him express his views, and it would remain face up in the tableau, in their tableau from that point forward. Or so another thing they could do, so let's pretend that it's my turn now. Aristotle went, then the player who played Aristotle then selects another card, right, and their turn is over. That's the idea. So there's only 2 left now. Let's say I'm next. The other player had card number 47. So I go next. So instead of expressing my views, I don't know that any of this stuff, I'm not too confident that, he knows what he's talking about necessarily about that stuff, right? So instead, one of the things I can do is they have specialties as well, and that, I guess, kind of areas of expertise. So another thing you can do on your turn, and this is called the Shadows of Deception, is there's always 3 of these available or face up, and those are kind of problems in philosophy that I guess kind of need to be solved, so to speak. So you can play it face down then if you have one, right? So I have aesthetics here, Camus, so I can discard this then, and since I did that, I can play Camus face down in my tableau, not face up. And if he remains that way, all cards in your tableau at the end of the game that are face down are worth 1 point. So another way to score points. And then you just flip that over. I'd pick my next card. Ooh, Plato. Pretty nice card there. So I would add that to my hand, right? And then the last player then do the same thing, and they would get this one by default, right? Then you just do it again, so on and so forth. Takes about an hour usually, right? And you go all the way through then, and as we see on our helpful This is like helpful information, I titled it. As you can see on some of this, right, here's the round summary and then end of game scoring. As you can see, then there's the different ways to score here. And that happens again at the end. I did want to say, so a lot of this is color coded. So you'll notice Camus is associated with the contemporary era, yellow, yellow. And there's 5 different eras. You'll notice the medieval is not represented, very well, so to speak. There's only 6 out of the 90. So what that means is actually medieval philosophers are slightly more valuable than, because one of the ways you can score points, in addition to the 2 other ways I mentioned already, is for your perspective. And so the more eras that are represented by face-up cards in your tableau at the end, you'll get more points then. So if for whatever reason you didn't play any, then you're going to get 0, right? If you have, let's say all of your cards are from the contemporary era, they're all yellow, well then you would just get 1. If you were able to get all 5, ancient, medieval, early modern, late modern, and contemporary, then you get 10 bonus points. And then we talked about the face down ones, right? 1 point each, and then talked about kind of, again, how the views work that are expressed by the player's face up philosopher cards. And I will say there are some, then one thing that's mentioned is that, all right, and actually that was changed to -2 and not -3. During play testing, we realized that was too harsh of a penalty. But you'll notice here then, some philosopher cards actually have special scoring features. So if they're face up at the end, right, you'd also count then their points. So for example, this makes sense if you know anything about John Stuart Mill. If Bentham's also face up in your tableau, as well as Mill, then you'll get a bonus of 3 points. Okay, because there's that relationship. It's supposed to represent the historical relationship between the two. So that's really, hopefully you get kind of a good idea of what the gameplay is like. Here's the rules. We've gone through extensive play testing on this one throughout the years. It's one that I think I have pretty finely tuned at this point. So here's just a bunch of, as you can see, different notes that I took over time, having to flesh some of this stuff out. So I mentioned I started with a -3 for all views that weren't represented on the path of alignment, but that was too much of a negative incentive. Players weren't placing their cards face up in their tableau because it was too much of a risk. So through play testing, we decided, -1 wasn't enough. -2 is the sweet spot. This actually is the very first paper, going way back to when I very first had the idea and kind of was representing it. As you can see, there's the fire down in the cave, then all the way up out of the cave. And there's Plato's Academy. And then all sorts of research went into this one, even though it is philosophy, and I know a lot about these guys. Again, had to balance the game and so on. So more play testing. Hopefully you enjoyed that overview of the Cave of Ignorance. Let's move on to the next game. All right, so here we have game number 35, Sophia set up. And the impetus for the name is my second youngest. She was probably about 6 months old. No, actually maybe more like a year old when I first started designing this. And so it was, I guess, in honor of her that I named it. Of all my games, this might be the one that has been play tested the most, played by friends and family the most. And as a result, it might be the most polished. I'm pretty proud of this one. It plays really quickly. The game, so it does the. I think of all my games, it does. It's one of those that does the best job in terms of offering simple, quick gameplay, but with a lot of depth underneath that. Like I talked about with respect to Wolfgang Kramer, I really think. I did a good job in terms of that with respect to this one. The cards and the sort of the interactions between the cards, there's a lot of depth that results from that. And yet the gameplay itself is super simple, as we'll see here in a moment. I did want to start by just quickly going through the overview that I have in the rules. It's a little longer, so bear with me. You are a governor tasked with developing a formidable city-state, a utopia that, once erected, shall never be forgotten. Unfortunately, your pesky neighbors aspire to do just the same, striving to lure the best inhabitants and garner the most prestige themselves. Ultimately, however, there can only be one ideal city-state, up against which all others shall inevitably be compared. Do you have the wisdom needed to make sure it's yours? You must take advantage of the special actions, defensive abilities, reputation, and much more associated with the unique characters you meet, and choose carefully who you think will contribute the most to your vision. Settle characters, and you will earn prestige corresponding to their reputation, and watch out for criminals and other unsavory characters who will detract from the prestige garnered by your great utopia. Characters offer an array of special opportunities as well, and you will need to work these into your plans if you want to bring success to fruition. Usually, balance is the order of the day, and to do well, you'll need to try and attract a well-rounded cast of characters, all of whom are classified as belonging to one of 9 categories: economy, academia, politics, infrastructure, spirituality, culture, military, crime, and other. However, viable strategies abound, and it is quite possible to achieve victory by emphasizing a more focused strategy. For example, you might employ a military strategy. You will also need to factor in events that take place, which affect both gameplay and scoring. Generate the most prestige, and your great utopia shall be crowned Sophia, for it will take careful planning and wise choices to make your ideal dream a true reality. So, I might need to fine-tune that game overview. It is a little long, but I think it does a good job kind of describing the general gist here. You are, again, sort of running a city-state, if you will, and so you're encountering all these various characters. And really, the character cards are the meat of the game, right? It drives almost all of the gameplay, these character cards. There's a few other elements to the game, of course. So the game typically takes 20 rounds, the way that is figured out. So I've kind of got it set up here for 3 players again. These are called attraction tiles, which you can acquire with your wealth. But one player will be first player, this is the first player figure. Everybody will start with, so I've given us 4 cards here. I just kind of have cards laid out here to give you an idea of what they look like, and the different colors, and the different colors stand for the different categories, and so on. But anyway, so the game's played in rounds. There's usually 20 rounds, unless, I actually had it in here somewhere. It's like, unless there's Armageddon is one of the ways, or there's certain characters, like a witch and something else, aliens, if the aliens show up, the game could end sooner. But more often than not, the game ends after 20 rounds. So there is this cool event card called Armageddon. So what you do at the very beginning is there's all these event cards. I want to say that maybe there's like, I don't know, 30, something like that, maybe even more. And you set aside, you shuffle these, and you set aside, get out 10. Then you shuffle Armageddon in with the remaining ones, and what's left there, you add an additional 10. And these first 10 that you set aside, they'll go on top. So you know the whole idea is there's at least going to be 10 rounds in the game. But then, with the next 10 below that, there's the possibility that Armageddon shows up. So, you're definitely going to play at least 10 rounds unless something weird happens, like the aliens show up, or there's a witch doctor in the game. But 95% of the time you're playing through 20 rounds. The game will last 20 rounds. And again, the rounds are super quick. You're playing one card, moving on, and so on. So, but anyway, that's how the length of the game is sort of tracked, is via these event cards. So the first thing that happens at the beginning of each round is this is rotated. So there's a new first player. They immediately draw a new event card. And at the very beginning, there won't be any events present, right? They'll all be empty. So they'll just pick one. But the idea is then in subsequent rounds, right, this gets rotated, then the next player, they can either cover that one up or put it on a blank one. And so at the end, by round 20, there's going to be lots of these piled up in different spots, right? And so you might end up with something like this at the end. So there's 2 basic kinds of events. There's round modifiers, which affect gameplay in certain ways. So for example, this one, at basically the beginning of each round, each player is going to gain, that's a terrible graphic, but that's basically the smiley face graphic. So each player is going to gain 1 more happiness at the beginning of every round, at least while this is face up. So maybe you have a big lead in happiness and you don't like that card being up. On your turn, you might cover it up then, right? So those are round modifiers. Again, they affect gameplay in certain respects. Then there's the other type of event is scoring modifiers. So they will give you unique ways of scoring another way you can score at the end of the game. So again, at the beginning of each round, basically you're rotating this and then drawing an event card and placing it. And then each player will draw typically one card. So they start with 4, right, in their hand. Let's see what we have here. So yellow is culture. By the way, the 1 there, that just indicates the set. So this is the base set. 1 is the base set. I actually made 2 expansions for this game already. There's the cards for one of them. But so yeah, so culture is one of the types, and so that's the set it comes from. You'll notice culture cards, a lot of times they don't have any special abilities. They're just generally worth more points at the end. All right, so they tend to be worth quite a few points or more points, but not offer any other abilities. Then you have like infrastructure, spirituality, politics, all sorts of different types of cards. And they're going to sort of have different tendencies and effects on gameplay. So for example, politics, the blue ones, they tend to affect happiness. So the more politics cards you play, so for example, if I had this one, one of the things I could do is discard it on my turn, and then I can gain happiness. I would move this up. And then usually, so you start with 4 cards. This is actually what I was getting to. At the beginning of each round, after the first player has done the event, everybody draws usually 1 card and adds it to their hand. Except if you have higher happiness, that might be altered. So let's say my happiness is there. I'd actually draw 2 at this point. So this would be the second part of each round, right? Part B, or however you want to put that. And notice there's only 3 parts. We already talked about part A, which is the first player rotating and selecting and replacing an event. And then B is just draw cards and add them to your hand. And you do have to discard down then, in turn order, down to 4, unless you have your happiness is actually up here. Then you not only would you get to draw an additional one, you also get to keep an additional one. And then all that's left is starting with the first player and proceeding clockwise. Everybody plays a card and from their hand, and that's super simple. So we have at this point, we would have had to discard one of these. So let's just say we discarded, I don't know, this farmer, and so he would get discarded. So we would have these, and on our turn we'd have to pick one, and one of the things I could do is just put it face up in my tableau. Boom. At the end of the game, this is going to get me +1 point. And it's going to, one of the things you can do, you can earn points based on how many different categories are present in your tableau at the end. So this will contribute to that. So again, one of the things you can do is just simply, it's called settling, right? So you're just adding basically population to your city-state, right? So this police officer joining my city-state is going to give me 1 point at the end. Or I can perform a special action on the card. So if this is the card I wanted to play still, but maybe I didn't want to settle it. Instead, I'm going to discard it and take the special action. So in this case, turn 1 face down card in your tableau face up. Well, what the heck's that all about, you might wonder? Well, during the course of the game, you can actually play crime cards and certain other cards. So crime is red. You can play some of those on, so like when I settle this card, I actually would settle it on an opponent face down. So that's what that arrow means. And that means on someone else, and it's face down. So as you notice, it's actually bad, -3 points. So where was that? The police officer, if I had him, that would be a handy, so if somebody else had played this card on me, I don't know what it is, it's making me nervous. I can play my police officer, go investigate that, and the idea is, and turn that over and discover, yikes, that's getting me -3, so I might try to then get rid of that in a later turn. Actually, wow, what a coincidence. Look, I have a judge, so maybe in my next turn I can, instead of settling him, which would be a good 2 points, I could discard this and get rid of this serial killer from my city-state, right, which would be even better. And the third thing you can do is simply, let's say you don't like any of your options, you can just draw an additional card and add it to your hand. And that's really, what do we have there, a clone? That's really all there is to the gameplay. Like I said, super simple. Rinse and repeat, right? So the next round, boom, that gets rotated. They're drawing an event card. They're replacing whatever event they want to. We're all drawing an additional 1 or possibly more cards. right? And then we're discarding down to 4 or possibly 5, depending, or even 6, depending on where we're at with our happiness, right? How happy our people are. That dictates how many people are coming through our hand, right? Then you play a card from your hand. That's all there is to it. And so again, usually that's going to be happening in 20 rounds. Now there are those different categories of the cards, like I mentioned. Other is just there's no synergistic effects amongst the cards. So the idea is a lot of the political cards will have a certain theme, and there's some synergy between amongst the cards. Other, not the case. This guy is pretty bad. He just clogs up your hand, not even worth any points. All right, so a lot of variety. Again, that's where the depth comes from in this game. So the economy cards, the way they work, they're kind of interesting. So they're green, so I can either settle this business owner for 1 point at the end, or I can discard to gain 1, let's say billion. I don't know what that actually represents, but it's just a 1 here. And so the way wealth works in the game, it's kind of a risky sort of proposition in the sense that you can basically have to keep building up your wealth, and then once per turn, you can turn in wealth and acquire an attraction. It's first come, first serve. So the first one who saves up $10 can turn it in, right, for this 30-point World Trade Center, which is an enormous amount of points, right? And the next person who turned in 10 would only get 25 from the university. So that's the, right, it's kind of a race to try to get the better ones. But you don't want to get stuck with, you know, wealth at the end because it's worth nothing. You need the attraction. You need to turn them in for the wealth in for attractions to benefit from, you know, amassing the wealth. The knowledge, those are the brown ones. I don't see any of those right off the bat. Here we go. Here's an astronomer. So again, you could just settle, or you could discard to gain 1 knowledge. So that's another tracker here. You just move these up. We all start with self-consciousness, thank goodness. First one would be the wheel, yada, yada, yada. And as you can see, it gets exponentially better the more you become knowledgeable. And maybe one day you become immortal. So there's these different tracks which you can sort of improve on, right? You might focus on certain ones, try to win the game a certain way. Again, different categories of cards. And so, of course, then at the end, usually once 20 rounds have been played, although I should have kept it out. I think it's right here. Maybe not. Wherever that Armageddon card is, if the Armageddon card's turned over, the game ends immediately. So again, that could happen 11th round on through the 20th round. So once that Armageddon card if it's pulled, everything stops and the game just immediately proceeds to scoring. Speaking of which, of course, there's the end game scoring then. So the first way you can score is if you get your happiness all the way to maxed out. You can get 10 points there. You also get points from knowledge, as we talked about. So that's another way to score points. Attractions, those will get you points, as we talked about. And then diversity, so I kind of hinted at this earlier, right? The more categories that are represented in your tableau, right? The more types of characters that you've settled in your tableau, in your city-state, the more you'll get from this diversity bonus. Now I think, is it only one type of category that doesn't count towards this? That's crime, but all the other ones count towards this. Then, of course, you add in the reputation. Some of that might be negative, so that would be no good. You add all that up, so events, there might be certain scoring modifiers, as we talked about. And the border reputation, I won't get into that. That's from one of the expansions. But that's really the gist of Sophia. Again, it's a real quick gameplay. You play 1 card basically each round, trying to build up the best city-state. All right, tons of play testing, as I intimated earlier, went into this. We've really fine-tuned this one over the years, but again, the cards are really what make this game. Just a ton of different cards and variety here. And as I mentioned, there's a whole two expansions that I've made at this point. So anyway, that's Sophia. Let's go ahead and move on. There's the alien. Okay, so here we have game 17, Psych Ward, set up on the table. So one fun little fact about me is I actually have a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. So I have a degree in psychology. I have a little bit of a background in the subject. Now that said, it's been literally decades since I've studied it academically. But nevertheless, I've always been interested in it, and I've alluded to that in some of my various videos. And naturally, I had to make a board game on the subject at some point, and so I did just that. It was actually quite a while ago. This one is, again, one of my favorites. There's a few things that I like about it in particular, some of the ways that you can modify the game via the game modifiers. Just the theme itself, at least at the time when I made it, I want to say it was like 2009, 2010. There weren't many games, if any, about, diagnosing and curing patients with psychological disorders. And so, again, the theme really appeals to me, naturally, if I have a degree in it. But anyway, so I ended up putting together this game. So I'll go ahead and read the game overview. So, in Psych Ward, players play the role of therapists taking on patients with an array of mental disorders that must be diagnosed and treated. The game board itself represents a large psych ward at which all players work as therapists, treating both inpatients and outpatients, in addition to pursuing research interests. As therapists, players must do two primary things with respect to the patients they encounter. One, diagnose the disorders afflicting them, and two, cure them by treating their disorders. Patients have a certain number of credibility points associated with curing them, which is determined by how difficult it is to diagnose and treat their disorder, i.e., more difficult patients earn a player more credibility points and have a higher prestige rank associated with them. Additionally, therapists conduct research in an effort to produce publications, which are worth credibility points, to gain perks, which give them specific advantages during gameplay, and to permanently modify the game via modifier cards. Credibility points are primarily earned by successfully curing patients, although there are a few other ways to receive them. The winner of the game is the first player to earn 10 credibility points, or the player that has the most credibility points after the completion of 24 rounds. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a deeper dive into the game itself. So as I usually do, I try to put together a kind of, how to set up the game, and then, a sort of game information card, or sometimes as I put a player reference card. But basically, in Psych Ward, each player, so it's kind of a action selection game. So each player has 5 actions. But what's interesting is, so on your turn, so there'll be a player that starts, and on your turn, you can go to any of the various areas on the board. But the catch is that where you go, how many of your action discs is required to go there varies. So different sort of activities, or I think that's what they're called, activities. Different activities will cost you a varying amount of action discs. So you only have 5 for the round. The round ends when everybody so I set up again the game for a 3-player game. The round ends once everybody either has no more action discs remaining, or can't or doesn't want to play them somewhere. So then basically, welcome to the Psych Ward. Here we have different areas of the board that you can go to. Then on your turn, they're color coded here. So we have red for general. That's kind of where you can acquire patients, and then where you need to go if you have diagnosed or want to cure, or have you cured them. So you officially document it there via the records department. But then we have, the yellow areas, the diagnostic area. And so these are sort of areas you're going to focus on to increase your competency, so that you're able then to diagnose the disorders of the various patients that you'll encounter throughout the game. So you'll have to, again, go to these sort of yellow areas to study and focus on these various sort of tests and, clinical observation, different things that are used, areas of expertise that are used by psychologists to, in fact, diagnose their patients. Okay, so there's 5 different ones, and so again, one of the things you'll have to be doing is increasing your competency at these various areas. So I meant to do this actually. Each player starts at level 1 on one of them. So we started one level higher on Lab A, since we're red, level 1 there. And of course, it corresponds to actual at least at the time, what were actual, diagnostic tests, and what is actually used, or at least again at the time, to diagnose patients. Right, I incorporated that, but I also wanted to simplify things, and so we have just A, B, C, D, E, and that's all that's referenced on the cards then, right? So keeping that simple. Same thing with then blue, treatment, that's where you'll go. It's one thing to, diagnose the patient, but then you have to start treating them to, in fact, cure them and get the points that they're worth. And so that will be then the blue area. You would go there, and in that case, all you do is actually take these. So let's say you at some point acquired a patient. You would properly diagnose them so you can turn it over. Now you need to, again, try to treat them. That's where, again, the blue areas come into play. That's what I'm getting at here. Each one, I simplified them. That's what I was talking about with respect to these as well, right? So when it comes to the treatment areas, there's 4 of them, again, based on real, areas of treatment at the time. And again, this is about, at least a decade old, but, some of them no doubt are still being used today. So the idea then is each patient is going to require, it's one thing to diagnose them, right? And here's, for example, what Keith Pearson needs to be adequately diagnosed. You need to have a competency level of 3 on Lab C, so we need to get down to here, and a competency level of 3 on Lab D. So this guy actually, on your patient board, they stay face down until you are able to diagnose them. And so again, to diagnose them, I would need, Keith in this instance, I would need a level 3C and a level 3D. And then the process of, again, treating them begins. So for Keith, he's going to need 2 treatments of X and 4 treatments of Y, again, keeping it simple, right? So one of the things I can do then on my turn, as it comes back around to me, let's say I used, some to get him, well then I can, and somehow, I had the proper, let's say the proper competency levels, and I diagnosed him and whatnot. So let's say I'm at the point in the game where I'm treating him. Well, one thing I can do then is I need 1X, so I can go to, where is that, up here. The first person to use that area during a round only has to use 2 actions. So I actually put 2 up there, and then they can only be used twice. Each round can only be used twice. And the second person to use it has to pay a little bit more. Okay, these down here, each of these labs. So one thing you can do then, again, is, let's say I had these action discs. One thing you can do is, say I hadn't diagnosed him yet. I needed to increase my competency on Lab C. I could go here. That can only be done once per round by one player, basically. So only one player is going to be improving at each of these various labs each round. So that's important, right? So you want to it's kind of a race to get the certain ones depending on who your patients are. But so then, that's going to cost a varying amount based on what level you were at before. So to get to level 1, it costs 1, but then next time it's going to cost me 2 to get to 2, and then 3 to get 3, and so on. So again, you're going to be increasing your competency levels of these various diagnostic labs throughout the game, as are your opponents, okay, in order to, again, be able to diagnose your patients. Going back to these patients, so there's both inpatient and outpatients. So I'll, again, pretend I had him, Keith Pearson. So one thing that's important is you can only have 4 patients at a time, so hence the 4 spots. So once you've diagnosed the patient, you turn it over, and then the treatment, right, begins. So let's say I started doing that, 2 X's here, okay. But let's say that I finally ended up getting all these spots fulfilled. Well then, I need to treat Keith, officially treat him, and I go to the records department, and in this case, it's going to cost 2 actions to officially basically score him. I go here, right, I remove all those treatment cubes, return those, and then Keith would actually go off. This is called the resume area, where you basically put your credibility points that have been scored. So most of the time you're only scoring these patients that you've diagnosed and cured, but there are some other ways to get some points as well that will show up in your resume. But anyway, so let's say we cured him. We have 4 open spots, so we wanted to get another one. One of the things you can do then is go here. You can interview patients. So what that means is these are the 4 interview rooms basically. We have 2 in the inpatient area and 2 in the outpatient area. For 1 action or 1 disc, basically on your turn, you can then look at one, right? Doesn't mean you get it, but that way, because again, you're limited. You can only sort of deal with 4 patients at a time. You might not necessarily want to take on a certain patient if they're going to need certain things that you're not very adept at, right? If they're going to need you to have certain competency levels that you don't have. So hence you might want to spend some time interviewing the patients. Alternatively, you can spend more it's 4 to get 1 from that interview room to actually acquire them and put them on your patient board. Or you can always just spend 3 to draw the top one. Of course, you're doing that blind. You don't know what you're getting, right? So, of course, you might not know from one of the interview rooms unless you actually interviewed them. You might not know what you're getting there either. So anyway, that's how you acquire more patients. Once you have 4, that's it. You can't displace a patient that you've already taken on, right? Let's say it's immoral, right? Once you've agreed to take them on, you're in it. So that's why you might want to, again, spend some time interviewing them, because you're only going to want to get, ideally the patients that you are adept at treating, right? So that you can then generate the points quicker, because again, it all comes down to you're trying to score 10 points. So I'm at 2 right now, trying to score 10 points, be the first one to score 10 points. So, and of course, once I cure him, then I would, and after going to the records department to, show that I did that, I would increase whoops, I just lost the disc, increase my credibility points then on the human resources spot of the board. But that's, for the most part, the gist of getting new patients and then diagnosing and treating them. There's a few other things you can do. So for example, you can go sleep, and basically that's one good thing to do if you have an extra action or 2 at the end of the round. You don't necessarily want to do anything with them, but maybe you want to store up for a bigger round. Well, you can go there, put one there, and then take an extra action disc for later for the next round, and you can store those up then. Now there is only a finite supply of these, but as long as they're there, you can go there and take another one for a future round. So there's 2 per player there. So since I set up for a 3-player game, I put 6 out there. Another thing you can do is go to the cafeteria, which basically just lets you go first the next round. So that that might be important, because you might want to have, for example, first dibs on, let's say, a perk card that's coming up. Speaking of perk cards, so that's what these are. These are associated with the round cards. So the round cards, there would only be 24 of these in the deck to begin the game. That's how you track the game. In the event that nobody gets 10 points, right, and 24 rounds are complete, then the game would end then, and then whoever had the most points would win. So the round cards have 3 different phases. Phase A, and for the most part Phase B, those are a lot of perk cards. So cards that are, if acquired by a player, give them significant gameplay benefits. Then alternatively, some of the Phase B and then most of the Phase C are scoring modifiers that will then affect the way certain things are scored or give players more opportunities to score. So those come up in the later round cards. But anyway, so how do you get those? Well, you go to the library and do your research. So most of these research cards are just research units. Now 4 of them of the 30 are actually points. And you can, so you have to spend 3 of your action discs to get a research card on your turn. And you just put it in front of you, face down. You can reveal, if you get a point, you can reveal that at any point, right? And so then, boom, it's in my resume, published an article, get another point. You could wait till you're at 9 and then reveal that for a sneaky 10th point in victory, right? But otherwise, most of them though are these, again, these research units. And so one of the things you can do on your turn, assuming you have some of those, is go there, and so you initiate the auction, you get to go first, and you just basically, so you're bidding for the one that's on top of here, and again, it's going to give you certain gameplay effects. This one's going to be available next round. If nobody bids on this, then this one goes here at the beginning of the next round, and you always see what's coming up the next round. And so anyway, as long as there's a card here, someone can initiate an auction. They begin the bid. They bid however many of their research units they want. the next person, in order to stay in the bidding, has to bid higher or they can pass. And the person who wins the bid then takes the perk card and gets it for the remainder of the game. And again, that's going to, who do we have here? Eddie. He's the one way actually that you can discard. Let's say you got a really bad patient that you don't want to deal with anymore. You can pass him on to Eddie. Other than that, though, you're stuck with the cards until you cure them, right? You're stuck with the patients, the 4 patients you've encountered. But anyway, so you can acquire these various cards, these round cards or not, and they're just, again, going to cycle through as the rounds are played. And so perks were one type of card, and actually I said scoring modifier, but they're just called modifiers. So towards the end, these become more and more prominent. They're going to, again, usually affect scoring in certain ways. And so the person who wins this in an auction can decide to either put it in play or not. Right? So there can be up to 6 modifiers that can really significantly affect then scoring at the end if it gets to that point. And if you draw, get one and there's already 6 there, then you just cover one that you want. But anyway, so gosh, is that it? I mean, I really went through this one pretty in depth. That's the gist of it. Again, for the most part, you're getting these patients and you're trying to both diagnose them and then treat them. And then here and there, you might do some research to try to get certain benefits, right? And these are pretty powerful, so they can be pretty significant. Or, a lot of them will allow you to increase at when you go to a certain lab, to increase your competency at a faster rate. So instead of only increasing 1 level for 1 action, you get to increase 2. So it's a faster sort of rate. All sorts of really good bonuses or benefits in the round cards. So anyway, that's it for the most part. Not too much to reveal in our file folder here, just a bunch of old notes. I did notice, so again, this is a super old one, and this is the original mock-up here that I did on paper when I was putting it together. Pretty cool to go back and look at this stuff. Anyway, that's it. That's Psych Ward. Let's move on. All right, so here we have game number 24, Hitman, set up. And before I go any further, I guess I should stress that this is a very mature theme, if you couldn't tell by the title. And so hence viewer discretion is definitely advised. I'm going to go ahead and start by reading the game overview. So each player assumes the role of a doctor or hitman, aiming to fulfill their contracts by taking out gang members associated with 6 notorious street gangs. These gang members aren't just victims, though. They also offer players the crucial weapons, vehicles, and other special items that are necessary to carry out more demanding, but also more rewarding contracts. Players are paid money for fulfilling their contracts, and the winner of the game is the player who has the most money at the end of the game. Players also earn money for executed gang members belonging to their rival gang, which is only revealed to others at the end of the game. Additionally, they earn money for taking out gang members associated with the strongest gang at the end of the game. That is, the gang with the least members executed. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the game itself. So out of the blue, I should just mention, I guess, a cousin of mine, so who I don't see very often. This is, I guess, a couple weeks ago. I was talking to him, and he just mentioned out of the blue, do you still create board games? And he was referencing about a decade ago, I had brought this particular game to a family gathering. Specifically, we get together typically for Christmas, and it's a big extended family. And so he was there, and he remembered me pulling this one out, which I had just designed. And so we played this, all that, I think it was a Saturday, all Saturday. And so he had these fond memories of it. And, he's like, do you still create these games? I really remember that one. What was it called? So on and so forth. And so he was referencing Hitman. And so one way I describe this game is that it's kind of like Grand Theft Auto, if you're familiar with the video game. Again, very mature theme. It's kind of like Grand Theft Auto, except I guess you're not really doing all the kinds of things you do in Grand Theft Auto. You're focusing specifically on, being a hitman. So taking out, in this case, you're taking out gang members that are associated with 6, very famous, I guess, street gangs. So the majority of in general, you're going to garner most of your points by taking out, specifically, you're going to acquire these contract cards, which everybody starts, each player. I set it up for 3 players again. So here's one opponent. They have to start with 2 contract cards. I gave them first player. An arrival card. Same thing over here with this player. And same thing with us then. So we're yellow. This is the police. And then green and orange, you'll notice everybody starts on a different, these are called hood tiles. There's 6 different ones. You randomly pick 6 different ones out of 10. So you shuffle those, and then you can really kind of just set up the board however you want. There's 2 specific ways that are mentioned in the setup. But so that's how you kind of set up the board. They have different, so why shuffle those terrain tiles up and so on and so forth? Because you're getting a different kind of city each time you do that. So it'll be a different layout depending on which boards are involved. You shuffle those up again, put them, really however you want, although there's these recommended ways. And so again, this is all in the game setup. And I will say one kind of detriment of this game, at least with the components that I have right now, with how small and fiddly they are, is the setup, because you're putting 2 of these teeny tiny tiles on to these 30 gangster tiles. So there's 60 of these 2 small ones, or these small ones, and you're putting those on the 30 different gangster tiles, which are themselves randomly assigned to the gangster tiles on the board at the beginning of the game. So that can be a little annoying, but if you have a couple people helping, that doesn't take too long. But anyway, so that's all part of the setup. This is the police. They of course get in the way. They'll always be on a police spot on the board somewhere. And one of the things you can do is move the police, and they affect the game. I guess specifically, I'll go ahead and just point out how they affect the game right now. So no hit can ever be performed on the same hood tile as where the cops are. So it doesn't matter where they're at on that hood tile, you can't execute, right, or perform a hit on any of the gang members that are on that tile wherever the cops are. So I could kill him since he's on a different tile, but not Ricardo, Cinco, etc. And then also you can't ever move your player piece through a spot with the cops. You basically have to completely avoid them. And so the player who's going to go last will pick first his spot. It can be anywhere, or his or her spot. It can be on any hood, or basically any empty or any blank space. That's the word I'm looking for. So as long as it doesn't have a cop car, an arrow, a subway, then they can put their, so who was that? That would have been orange. So orange put their figure here. And then I would have put, by the way, so the player is going to go last, orange. They also then put the cop car out. So then I would pick any unoccupied spot except on the hood tile that has already been picked. So I couldn't put it where orange is, but I'm going to go ahead and then put it here. And then green, who's going to start the game, goes last. Again, they can't put their player piece on any board that already has a player piece. It could be the one with the cops, but you want to generally try to avoid the cops. And then you begin the game. And so basically the way the game works, so in general, I think I started hinting at this. The main way you're going to garner points is you're trying to fulfill these contracts. So each player starts the game with 2 contracts, right? We have Lil Martini and Vain Veins. And then we start with a rival as well. I guess I should have mentioned that a little bit more. So every player, right, is starting with one of the 6 rival cards, and those correspond to the 6 gangs that are in the game. And so the idea there is, in addition to the main way you're going to garner points, which is by way of going and killing these gangsters that are on these contract cards, you'll also then get points associated with the rival card that you have. So I want members of the Italian Mafia to be killed in this game, because I'll get, in addition to whatever contract cards I fulfill, or in other words, gangsters associated with those contract cards that I've killed, I'll also then get points for however many Italian Mafia members are killed, regardless if it's me or not that killed them, and regardless of whether or not contracts were fulfilled when they were killed. Because that's one of the cool, I guess not necessarily cool, but interesting things about this game is you can just go around willy-nilly just killing gangsters if you wanted. You will only get points if you have the corresponding contract card for them, but you could just go around and kill various gangsters if you were so inclined. Maybe you suspected somebody had a particular contract card for some reason and you wanted to deprive them of the opportunity, and it was convenient as you're going by to do something else, you could stop by and kill that gangster. So kind of interesting, again, that you don't have to have the corresponding contract card. That's only required if you want to generate points yourself from killing the gangster. But you can go around and kill whatever gangster, provided you meet some certain requirements, which we'll get into here in a second. But anyway, going back to your rival. So we have the Italian Mafia. We know then that our opponents aren't going to have that rival card because there's only one for each specific gang. So we are going to get bonus points then for the Italian Mafia, however many. We want this to go as far this way as possible because we'll then generate more points, right? And by the way, so one of the ways, there's 3 ways, I guess I can cover this real quick, 3 ways the game ends. One of the ways is any of these gangs lose all their members. So as soon as, let's say, the Hells Angels, the orange, they're all color-coded as well, right? Orange, let's say every orange gang member, whenever a gang member is murdered, I guess, right, they get an X on them, right? So let's say every orange gang member on the board was killed, had an X on them. Then that would trigger the last round. Everybody would get the same number of turns, so it would end with this player, and then we go to end game scoring. So that's one way. Another way is through fulfilled contracts. If a player gets to wherever, depending on the number of players, so we're playing 3 players, right? In this case, 20. If one of the players gets to 20 points or cash from their fulfilled contracts, then that would trigger the end of the game. They wouldn't necessarily win, right? Because there's other ways to get money as well. Money is points in this game, basically. But that would be another way that the end of the game would be triggered. And then finally, another way the game can end is if all 6 shot callers in the game have been killed. So there's 6 shot callers in the game, and so here's an example of one, Clothead here, who's going to be pretty tough to kill because he requires the helicopter. I believe there's only 1 helicopter in the game. Oh, Mr. X has it down here. So not only is there only 1, it's pretty far away too, but assuming you could, so what this means, I guess I can go into requirements here. So to kill Clothead, right, I need to get to the space that has an arrow next to him. And if there's a requirement like this, okay, so this blood splatter here says, hey, there's an additional requirement in order to execute this guy. You have to have a helicopter in this instance. So he's going to be tricky to kill. But then the shot caller, so 6 of these gang members will randomly have, right, a shot caller, here's a couple others, assigned to them. And it's basically just an easy way to get another $1 million or 1 point or whatever we're going to call these, right? But then let's say we've killed Clothead, we have the helicopter, and we kill him. So let's say we had the helicopter, whoops, picked that up from Mr. X before. And so we had somehow gotten over here, right, and we killed him. And let's say that we had his contract somewhere. We would actually take these off, okay, only if we have the contract. Now again, we could kill Clothead, right, but we'd only get the stuff on him if we actually have the contract card. And I should say we couldn't kill him, period, unless we have a helicopter, right? But if we have the helicopter, we don't need the corresponding contract card. And in fact, as a reality here, we don't have Clothead, we have Veins. But let's say we did have him, okay? In order to actually take these and put them on, you'll notice there's 2 spots here, right, for bonus points, basically. So let's say for a second this was Clothead. Then we killed him, right? We would put this here, and then at the end of the game, right, that's actually worth not 1. Every one you kill that you have a contract card for is worth a baseline of 1 point. If there's any intel tiles, which is what these tiles are called that are on each of these, that are worth bonus points, then those are worth those points as well. So this is actually not worth just 1, it's worth 6. So let's say I'd fulfilled that, I would then move this to 6. So then you can see once somebody gets to 20 in a 3-player game, that would trigger the end of the round. So what you're doing in general is you get 3 actions. I know I'm kind of all over the place in terms of explaining this, but so we're going around, starting with the first player. He or she would take his or her turn, and basically you can do 3 things on your turn. You can move your dude on the map, which is kind of like how I had to get over to Clothead there, right? So they might move, they can move 1 to 5 spaces basically on the board. They can use the subway. So if they get to the subway, then for 1 action they can move to any other subway spot on the board. So that's one way to get somewhere else in the city super quick. Okay. Now each of these again is 1 action. So you get 3 actions on your turn, then it moves to the next player. You can move the police to any other spot on the hood tile that they're currently on, not any other spot, any other police, they always have to go to a police car spot, right? But it can be any other police car spot on the same hood tile or orthogonally adjacent. So that just means, you know, not diagonal, but like the one over here, any of these police car spots, or the one over here, any of these, okay? Since it started on this hood tile, it could go here, here, or here. And again, it has to go to a police car spot. So that's one way you could like block an opponent. If you see somebody moving and you think they're gonna try to go through there, well, you know, make them, let's say you had an extra action at the end of your turn, move the cops and make them waste an action themselves then to get through there if they in fact want to. Okay, so going back to this, you can acquire contracts. You start with 2, right? You can acquire a contract for 1 action. Now the catch with those is of course, you need those to get most of your points, right? But if so these are actually held in hand until you know, actually execute the corresponding gang member, then you would put it face up in front of you. And if you don't do that with some of your contract cards, those will actually lose you points at the end of the game. So if you notice the bottom, I don't know why I called it expenses, but you'll actually lose 1 point or money for each contract card still in your hand. So you don't want to just acquire a bunch of contract cards, especially if they're going to be real difficult to, you know, for example, this requires a car with durability of 2 or higher, right? So this car wouldn't satisfy this. And not only that, not only do you need a good car, but you actually need specifically a silencer or sniper rifle as well. So those are 2 very tough restrictions. So you don't want to necessarily get that gangster unless you have those items or think you can get those items, right? Because otherwise it's going to end up costing you points in the end. So again, you can acquire a contract. Of course, you could spend an action to ditch a contract, and you put it face down at the bottom of the face down draw stack. So you can get rid of them, but it's going to cost you an action. So I mentioned this, right? One of the things you can do then, of course, is go to those arrows. Arrows always point to a gangster, and that's how you kind of interact with them, whether it's killing them or I mentioned getting the helicopter. One of the things you can do is if you go to a gangster's spot is you can acquire 1 item tile, right? So this is a restriction saying, hey, you need something else in order to execute him, but this is an item tile, right? And so I take that and I have it then for the remainder of the game. So it'll help me satisfy then certain requirements. Okay, so where do I see one? Like this one for, where was it? This one, range +1, 1 plus range. This would satisfy that, right? Because it has a range of 2. So I could kill Big Lil now that I have this gun, whereas before I couldn't. Even though I had a helicopter, you know, he specifically needs this. Okay. So if you go to an arrow, right, you can execute them, and you don't need the corresponding contract card to execute them, as I mentioned. In order to get points for doing so, though, you would have to reveal the contract card at that time. And then if there's any bonuses, right, you would take them, put them on there, like I said. Another thing you could do, though, when you go here is then, like I was mentioning, you can get the item. You can get 1 item. So I talked about getting this gun, this helicopter. Let's say I'm down here at this point. I can get the economy card from the White Russian, okay, et cetera, et cetera. And you go through this, you do, you know, your 3 actions on your turn, and then it just rotates until one of those 3, right, these are going to be going down as you kill these various gang members. You're moving these, adjusting this stuff, et cetera, maybe a shot caller, 2 or 3 are killed, so on and so forth. So this is going on, right? And so at the end, it might look something like that. Green got to 20. Hopefully we're a little bit higher there. You'll have a bunch of, you know, X's on various gangsters all over the board. So again, when you execute a gangster, whether you had the contract for him or not, you put X's, you know, on the corresponding tile. So he can't be executed again, obviously. And moreover, if there's still an item tile on that gangster tile, that can't be acquired if the gangster's been killed. So only living gangsters can you go to and acquire their item. And that's really it. So you go and you go and you go. And so maybe I had these various You know, Silent Sam, I got him as well, and there's Clawhead, and you know, I was able to, let's say, get some other points this way. Okay, so then at the end, right, lo and behold, so if I had killed 2 of these, then this is going to be at least here, right? So anyway, so the game end is triggered, so we just go to scoring, which is pretty straightforward. You're already going to have basically all your points from these tracked, because you do that throughout the game as you're doing it in the game, because that's one of the ways you can trigger the end, is if somebody through these fulfilled contract cards gets to the requisite point total for the number of players, and that would trigger the end. Right, so you're already going to kind of know the whole point was step 1 of scoring. Then you go to rival bonus, and that's when everybody would turn over their rival cards. Right, and then we all get points corresponding to where that rival is. So only 2 of the Italian Mafia were killed. Apparently I did the killing for both of them, and so I would only get 2 extra in that case. And of course the opponents are doing the same thing. So the Russian Mafia, for who is that? Let's say they're green. They would also get 2 points, 1, 2, etc., etc. And then the strongest gang. So this is kind of incentive to, you know, make sure that every gang is sort of being killed to some degree, because it rewards. You get basically $3 million or 3 points or whatever we want to call that, $3 for every gang member that you have that's associated with the strongest gang. And what is the strongest gang? It's whatever gang has the most gang members that survived at the end. And here we actually have a 3-way tie. So this would actually give a bunch of bonus points, because everybody would score points for any gang member that they killed that was a member of Hell's Angels, Italian Mafia, or Mexican Mafia. So, and it's a 3-point bonus, so it's pretty significant. So we would get 6 points because we have 2 Italian Mafia that we had executed. So, and you of course adjust that. And then the last thing you would do, as I mentioned a moment ago, subtract for any contract card still in your hand. And then that's it. You know, the winner is basically the player with the most cash, naturally, right? What else would a hitman be after all? So a mature theme to be sure, but this one is pretty fun. Again, a lot of randomization, has kind of that Grand Theft Auto feel in the sense that you're a bad guy going around and doing a lot of killing. The pre-game sort of setup, I think, is really, in my mind, the only detriment to this game. Again, it can be a little tedious with these little pieces, but anyway, that's Hitman. I don't really have much in the file folder this time for you, but that's Hitman. On to the next one. Okay, we've got game number 38, Scientific Revolution, on the table. This one kind of stands out to me in the sense that it's one that I played a lot with the family. So American Numismatist was certainly one that my kids played a lot of, but then I remember Jack and Abby when they were younger. So this one, what was it, 2014? I think I made this one. So, you know, they were 5, 6 years old and just getting old enough to kind of pick up games. And this one's simple enough that, you know, they were able to catch on to it. And so I can remember playing this with my wife and those 2 kids. And so I obviously have some fond memories of that. But I'll go ahead and start by reading the overview for the game. So in Scientific Revolution, you control the destiny of a prestigious scientific academy, striving to initiate glorious scientific advancements through clever management of the scientific geniuses you come across. Your aim is to amass more prestige than other academies pursuing the same aim. To ensure victory, you must monitor the progress of 6 sciences: astronomy, biology, chemistry, logic and math, physics, and psychology. Each science features 5 advancements. For example, astronomical observation, heliocentrism, Big Bang, black holes, and extra dimensions in astronomy, yielding more prestige for more difficult advancements. Scientists can be used to research theories, discover advancements, develop technologies, contribute to special projects, and more. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. This one, again, is pretty straightforward, pretty simple, that it shouldn't take very long at all to just kind of go through exactly how the game works. So The first kind of step is the setup. That's not too tedious at all. You have what are called special project tiles. There's a stack of those, and so you shuffle those and randomly just assign one to each of these spots on the special projects board at the beginning. And that is one way, using your scientists that you have, and the scientists you have come by way of these cards. Oh, there's my son. So this is our starting hand. Everybody starts with 3 scientists, and so there's a ton of actual historical scientists. Apparently, I threw Jack in there and probably myself, but otherwise, it's like all kinds of different, real life, so to speak, scientists, historical scientists in these various fields. And so one of the things, again, you'll be able to do is contribute to these special projects, and these tiles are randomly assigned for each of these projects at the beginning. And again, you're using these scientist cards they're kind of I would say, the main driving feature of the game, the main component for sure, because you're using them one per turn. Each turn you're going to be playing one of your 3 cards to then do something. Whether it be contribute to a special project, or more often than not, probably place one of these are supposed to be cubes. I call them cubes throughout the rules and setup and so on, but we just have these little tiddlywinks, or I don't even know what to call them really, a tiddlywink. But you're more often than not going to be playing a card and then putting one of your cubes or whatever we have to represent you on one of the science boards accordingly. And that's really going to be the gist of the game. But how many of your cubes each player, so again, these are supposed to be cubes. How many of those each player starts with depends on the number of players. So I set it up for a 3-player game. So we each have 16, and that will also then track the game length, because basically each turn you're putting one and only one of your player pieces somewhere. And once everybody's done that and nobody has any player pieces or cubes or whatever you want to call them left, then that triggers the end of the game. So it'll be basically everybody is going to get, in this case, a 3-player game, everybody will get exactly 16 turns. Okay, so that's, again, an explanation of how long the game lasts, and it's kind of a general sense of what you're doing on your turn, right? But what can you actually do with the cards? So you're doing basically one of, it looks like 5 things. Okay, so, and you're always going to play a card, exactly one card, and use exactly one tiddlywink each turn, right? So you can use a card. So Jack here is pretty versatile because he can contribute to, so what is this? Biology, logic and math, and psychology, right? He can do some things. He's pretty versatile. Doesn't have a super high, let's call it competency level, right? It goes from 1 to 5. 3's not bad. So hey, that's something. And again, he's pretty versatile. So that's a pretty good card to have. You'll see them there. They contribute, right? Every science card contributes something to one or more of the sciences. So most of them are just one, but some of right, Einstein, he contributes, again, like Jack, to several sciences. In fact, he's really, really powerful in physics, naturally. So that's kind of, a general sense of how the scientists work. Right, so you're playing, let's say, on my turn, I said, I'm going to play Pythagoras. So he's good for logic and math. I take one of my tiddlywinks, and he has a competency level of 4. So that's going to let me do a few things. What can that let me do? Well, first of all, it could let me contribute to, I talked about the special projects. So let's talk a little bit more about those in depth. Here we see the best, most lucrative one. I don't quite have enough for this, right? It requires a 5. Pythagoras is only a 4 at math. I should say logic and math. So I couldn't put it here, but I could put it here. And so from that point forward to the rest of the game, nobody else can put anything on there. That spot is mine. And so the way it works is at the end of the game, I will get 2 points for having that there. In addition, if all of these for Project 3 are fulfilled, or somebody, it doesn't have to be me, they're covered by players, right, whoever it is, all 5 of these are covered up, then for each of my tiddlywinks in there, I'll get a bonus of 5. So let's say this is the only one I had and other players had these other ones filled up, I would still get 5 extra points in addition to my 2. So one of the ways you're scoring points at the end is by way of these special projects in exactly that fashion. So Project 3 pays off the most per cube or tiddlywink you have on there, but it's harder to fulfill because there's more of them, required to fulfill it, whereas if project 1, right, only 3 of them have to be fulfilled to trigger that bonus. Now, how hard they are and which ones they are, that's all randomly assigned again at the beginning of the game. But anyway, so that's one of the things I could do, and then boom, my turn would be over, right? I'd draw another card. Actually, this is a special one I don't want to talk about here in a second. Hopefully I don't forget. And then it would go on to the next player. They would do the same thing, right? So they would play a card, let's say then, I'll explain how this works in a second, but they put that out there, they discarded a card, drew another one, right? Fast forward, and let me explain then. Let's say I had, actually this is a good one, Richard Feynman. So I'm going to play him. So this is physics, right? He's got a 3 level. So I already talked about one of the things I can do, right, is the special projects, okay? Another thing I can do is go to the science board, and the way this works is you're sort of advancing in each of the sciences, right? And the first thing you have to do to sort of advance, another player already did this, right, is research the next thing. So here, they could put that there and research gravity. Now, the interesting thing is you could research any of these as long as you have the requisite competency level of the card you played, right? So I could research this one. But the catch is, at the end, I'm only going to get these points, or players only earn the points for the research spots if that subsequent advancement has also been developed. So there's the research spot and the development spot. You can research all the way up at any point, provided you have the requisite, what's it called? You know, capacity or ability level from the scientist. But you're only going to get those points at the end if they've also been developed. So speaking of development, how does that work? So there's the research that you can do, and talked about that. So alternatively, you can use, this is why I hate these tiddlywinks, you can use, right, one of the things you can do is then develop, use your scientist to develop. So in this case, right, he's got a competency level, that's what I was looking for earlier, of 3. So I could do anything I want on this board because it's only requiring a 2. So I could develop, right, with my level 3 physicist there, I could develop gravity, develop the theory, or however you want to put it, right? And so at the end, what this means, again, I will get points for this. You always will get points for any of the development spots you have. And then this is also going to then trigger the scoring for this, and in this case, pink. So I kind of helped pink out. But so obviously, if you're researching these various aspects, you want to make sure they eventually get developed. Now, down the road, let's say I had a really good physicist who had like a competency level of 5. Hey, I want to develop that 5. No, I can't. Development, you have to go the next spot up, right? And it also has to have been researched, right? So to develop this, first this has to be researched, and then also this would have had to been developed. So if this wasn't here, let's say that this was, I still couldn't develop relativity because gravity has to have been, or it's not developed, discovered. That's what the word is, not developed, discovered. So I actually have to discover gravity before relativity, okay? So two kind of requirements, has to be researched, and all prior discoveries on that track have to have been fulfilled. So if this was here already, then and I played, let's say, a level 5 physicist, well, then I can go here and play this here. Okay, so that's the general, and there's one more thing I guess to point out here that you can do. So let's say I played, this is actually a perfect example. So let's say I played this now and this board looked exactly like this. I can't really advance things anymore here because I don't have a level 4 or higher. What I can do though is I could still take advantage of Richard here and what is it called? Develop a technology. It's called developing a technology, regardless of what it's called. Basically, I can go to up to whatever level that is, as long as it's been discovered, and basically I'll get points for sort of developing a technology associated with that advancement. All right, and that's infinite. Any number of players can do that, whereas these are always just one, right? You could end up with like a bunch of people developing technologies for this one. Okay, and you'll notice each board starts off with, you always have the ability to develop a technology associated with the level 1. So you're always going to be able to do something on the science boards because everybody has at least a level 1 of some science associated with them. So that's really, I think we went through everything already. I do want to talk about that one special card here in a second. So we talked about kind of how each of these things worked, the special project. I guess the very last thing you can do is just simply, let's say none of these other things really looks appealing. You don't want to just get one point. Instead, you can discard your cube here, and basically you'll discard whatever card you played for that turn. And additionally, you can discard, let's say I was really trying to go specifically for, let's say, chemistry or something like that. You can discard your other 2 cards as well, or any number of your cards in your hand, basically, and then draw back up then to 3. So that's the last thing you can do, and that's one kind of thing, one way you can kind of like try to get more specific cards, although you never really know what you're going to draw. So most of these, I have it here somewhere, are the scientist cards. There's only 4 special cards that let you kind of have let you do special things. But again, you're always playing a card, putting a cube out on your turn, or a tiddlywink. Now there is this one, speaking of those 4 cards, one of them is actually named after the game, Scientific Revolution. So whenever you draw this, you immediately reveal it just like it says. So it's an exception, like it immediately takes place and you draw another one to replace it. And basically what it does is there's these neutral cubes or tiddlywinks, and they just go out and they immediately develop the next technology at on each science board. Now that's provided there's one available. So these research spots would actually have to be fulfilled too. But so let's say it was like that. For everyone that was like that, you would go around. Let's see, these were off, right? Completely different sort of game state here. But let's say it was like that and that was like that. Actually, let's do it like this. So you literally go through when that card's played. And for everyone that looks something like this, right, you would actually, with these neutral cubes, of course that blue one's not going to be there, it's going to be a player cube. You would go through and then with the neutral cubes, develop the next spot. Wouldn't do this one, wouldn't do this one. This would be a different color. So, whoops. Sorry about that. We would do that one, right? And then this is the case, we would do that one as well. And this would be a different color initially, but say that yellow one was there, and then we would do that. So a lot of explanation for that one little card, but it is, kind of a revolution. It can dramatically change the game state in the sense that it's significantly advancing things all of a sudden. So, every now and then you have one of those major scientific revolutions, so to speak. So I'm trying to emulate that in a way. What are the chances that comes up? It comes up every now and then, but it's only one of 108 cards. So again, this one plays quick. It's simple, yet, things are sort of dynamic enough that it remains fun. So again, that's Scientific Revolution. This is one, again, that I played extensively with the family. It looks like we have some playtesting notes from this one as well. Various people have some suggestions. That's how we fine-tune things. Yeah, anyway, that was, again, Scientific Revolution. Okay, so in front of us here on the table we have game number 26, titled Spy Society. So not High Society, Spy Society. So I don't have a game overview to read, so instead I'll just kind of generally describe what we're up to here. So this game kind of involves some mechanics that I really like, and it's probably one of the reasons I like it a lot. And that's the idea of hidden identities, so you don't really know who's who in terms of your opponents. And so deduction is involved, another sort of, you might say, mechanic or facet of a game that I really like. So those are involved here. The idea is every player has their own spy society, and that's decided at the beginning of the game depending on how many players. So as I often have here, I have a setup card. So again, depending on the number of players, I've set up the game for 3 players here. 1, 2, this orange dude should not be here. So there's some other components here, depending on what tiles you use. So there's 4, I'm all over the place here. There's 4 that are in every game: the informant's house, IPSA, EIC, and the hospital. Those are all 4 of those are in every game. But then The other 5 are randomly, you shuffle the remaining tiles, and the other 5 are then shuffled with the 4 that are in every game, and you have a random, then you shuffle all those, and then you lay them out. And so there's different setups you could have. I like the 3x3 though. And so you have a kind of random setup each time, and each of these tiles has various, this is how I got on this, each of these tiles has different components that might come into play. So if we had the mall, right, we'd have these different items, and then so players could do different things on these different tiles. Now these ones aren't in the game, but just to show you, some examples here. All right, must discard all character cards in your hand. Downtown. So if these other ones are involved, then you might throw in some extra components there. But I should have it completely set up. Then we do have the police figure there for the police station, but I should have it all set up then for 3 players. These are the character tiles. Start to the side here. A few other tiles. The character card deck starts there. Each player is. The character card deck's shuffled, and then each player starts the game with 3 cards. So we have our own 3 here. And then I mentioned, so each player has their own spy society. And again, that's randomly determined at the beginning of the game, much like the city is. And so in the 3-player game, again, we are each going to have 2. So there's 12 spies in the game. Okay. Well, I shouldn't say spies. There's 12, let's say, characters in the game. Okay. And so these characters, there's going to be a certain number of spies and then a certain number of rogues. So rogues, in other words, are the kind of sneaky characters, but the idea is you shouldn't be killing them. They're not bad spies, right? So these always add up to 12. Okay, there's 12 characters in the game. And so whether or not a particular character is a spy or a rogue, that hinges on whether or not a player has drawn them in the game. So in a 3-player game, each character draws 2 of the 12 Spy Society character cards, again each corresponding to one of the 12 characters. And so 3 times 2 is 6. So there will be 6 total spies, 2 per player, and then 6, you might say, innocent rogues. So in other words, there will be 6 left, and whatever Spy Society character cards aren't drawn by players, you put here. And so one of the things players can do is go here to the informant's house, draw a card, and deduce, or be able to figure out for sure, one of the characters at least that's not a spy, right? Because you know that if the card is here, then a player doesn't have it, and hence that character is not a spy, right? And then once you view it, you put it back under the deck. And so each time you go there, right, you can learn a little bit more information in terms of who the other player's spies are. So again, in the 3-player game, 6 of the 12, I cannot hold that straight, 6 of the 12 will be spies, 6 will be rogues. So who are we? Mystic Man and Paula Perry. So throughout the game then, the idea is we're going to be trying to do 2 things ultimately. Making some money by performing missions, okay? And when you perform a mission by basically moving a character there and playing the right card, or actually just getting a character there, then you move, depending on what character it is, you would move then that tile to the character's bank, basically. You can only ever have 3 money tiles on each of the characters, or I should say payment tiles. And so that's one of the main ways. That's one of the 2 ways you kind of score, you might say. The other way is by way of assassinating various characters in the game. And the idea here is you want to be careful because you don't want to just assassinate people willy-nilly, because when you assassinate a character, if another player has that character, in other words, that character is a spy, then you get points. But the penalty is actually worse than what you gain, right? If you're wrong and you assassinate an innocent, right, rogue instead, right, no other player has that corresponding Spy Society character card, then you're going to lose points, right? Pretty significant chunk. So you really want to be careful, right, who you go around killing, or assassinating, I should say. So 2 ways to score points in general, right, at least in the main setup. And again, the city itself is sort of randomly determined at the beginning of the game. Each of these tiles does different things. So I mentioned the informant's house, right? Well, let's talk about the 4 that are in every game. The informant's house which is how you then can sort of figure out more about which characters belong to the other spy societies. The hospital is always in every game, right? And so, as it says, characters that are punched, and we'll talk about what it means to be punched here in a second, right? So basically, characters that are injured go here to the hospital, right? If they're assassinated, they actually go here to the cemetery, fittingly enough. Okay, so that's the hospital. And then the other two that are in every game are these, basically how you can make money, right, by completing the missions. IPSA, or the Important People Security Agency, and then the EIC, or Extraterrestrial Intelligence Corporation. And so you have these payment tiles. You begin the game with one, you shuffle the payment tiles, and you assign randomly, right, one to face up to each of those, let's say, mission tiles or mission locations. And then the rest are just left in the face down deck. So each time one of these is claimed, you just immediately replace it with another random one. I think those go from anywhere from 1 to 3, right? And so there's slightly more of the 1s, a little bit less of the 2s, and then a few of the $3 ones. So again, basically at the end, you're gonna score. So this is in one of the other location tiles. So that's ignored for our game, right? As I mentioned, you're gonna add your payment tiles plus your assassination tiles. So basically think of money, right, as points as well. So you add those up right, when you reveal these at the end. So you only reveal these at the end. So I'm only going to score based on whatever of these assassination tiles I've acquired, plus whatever payment tiles Mystic Man and Paula Perry have banked throughout the game, if any. So I'm trying to, without getting others to realize, the opponents, without getting them to realize who I am, because then they'll just assassinate those characters, I'm trying to get Mystic Man and Paula Perry, get them some money. Okay, because that's how I score points. So that's a little bit about how the different locations work. And so you can kind of see what some of these other random ones were then. So the police, actually, this is a good one because you can, when you go there, you can move the police. And so wherever the police are, you can't assassinate anyone in that location. You can't punch them, and you can't steal them or steal from them. And so what do all these things mean? So I think I covered all. There's the last one, Bikers Club. All of our locations then, and lake. So basically the lake is just, you've got to go around it. But so the character cards, how does that work? So on your turn, we start with, again, everybody starts with 3 character cards. Okay, and everybody's sort, let me back up. There's one more thing at the beginning of the game that happens, and that's in turn order. So you randomly determine first player. And again, nobody knows whose stuff is whose, right? Whose characters belong to whose spy societies and which ones are rogues and so on. So in turn order, the first player picks any of these characters and puts them on any location. Boom, whoops, I guess it couldn't be on the lake, right? And the next player would then pick any of them and put them on whatever location. And any amount of characters can be on any tile or any location at any time, at the beginning and throughout the game, other than the lake, of course. Right, so go around basically until every character, all 12 of them, are on different locations. So you might try to figure out to somebody, you can already start maybe based on where people are putting characters at the beginning, kind of try to make some deductions or figure out maybe who the other players are, right? So there's our Mystic Man. Maybe we set the Mystic Man there to, of course, whether or not we have Mystic Man, whether we can do anything with Mystic Man depends on what character cards we have, right? But so anyway, there's only so much, I guess, you could do, right, in terms of placing the characters here at the beginning. It kind of depends on, again, what character cards you start with. But so all the, again, character tiles, let's call them, representing where the characters are, they start on the game, then you are on the board, right, on these various locations, then you actually start the game. So starting with the first player, right, and then proceeding clockwise, you do 2 things. First, in phase 1, you play a character card and resolve any activities that result, or instead of that, you can draw a character card, right, so you don't have to play one. And then the second thing you do in phase 2 is you either draw or discard character cards until you have exactly 3 in your hand again. Then it moves to the next player, clockwise. And by the way, how does the game end? And it ends immediately when the last character card is drawn. Okay, and there's the deck. Okay, that's always the same. And then, or so I should say, or the last payment tile is drawn. So it's drawn, right? So when the last one of these is drawn, or as is more often the case, the last one of the payment tiles is drawn. I shouldn't say more often, it's kind of maybe pretty equal. So we keep going until one of those two things that happens. Then we go to scoring like we suggested. So again, going back to, what you're doing on your turn. Let's say that somebody else is gone, it's our turn. So the first thing we do is either play a card or we could draw a card, okay? So let's play a card. Now, usually the card will indicate one of the specific characters and then something you can do, okay? There's different actions you can do. Sometimes you might draw, it's kind of a better one, right? You can pick any of the characters then and do this specific action, okay? So it's what character can you do something with and what is it you can do, okay? So maybe, let's see if Rufus Redford is on Guy Gay's tile as well. We're gonna play Rufus Renford and we are going to, what the heck, let's get things started with the bang. We're gonna go ahead and just kill Guy Gay. Because Rufus Renford, so we're using that character that we played, we can kill or assassinate any other character that's on the same location. Well, Guy Gay was there. Sorry, Guy Gay. So he goes then to the cemetery. Nothing involving Guy Gay can be done again. If he had any payment tiles up here, those would be frozen. Nobody can steal from him. Nobody can move him. In fact, if anybody has Guy Gay character cards in there, which this one does, you go in turn order and discard those and draw. Well, he had 3 of them. So, whoops, 4. What a cheater. So, and let's say that actually this player had 3. They would draw then 3 new ones to replace those. Okay. And then so every other player would do that. So all the Guy Gay cards are then discarded. And henceforth, if you ever draw, any player ever draws a Guy Gay card or any character for that matter that has been assassinated before, they just immediately discard it and draw a different one. Okay, so the more characters that are assassinated, kind of one interesting quirk here, the more characters that are assassinated, the quicker then the game goes because you're flying through these character cards faster. So we would, the instant someone is assassinated, if any other player has that character, in other words, it's a member of their spy society, they immediately would reveal that card. Okay, I didn't actually know that, but so this player would say, okay, you got me, you're really lucky, but way to go. And since, lo and behold, it was a spy, we would then take +3 points. Okay. Fortunately, because again, if neither of my opponents had that card, then I would draw a -5. Okay, so end of my turn, second phase, I have 2 cards. You always end your turn, whether you have too many or too few, you need to then draw or discard so that you end with 3. So we would draw then a card. It would move on to the next player. All right, so let's say then, right, we know, this is actually a pretty good card because we know Mystic Man, right, is somebody we're trying to make some money with. So let's say it gets back to us and we play this one. So we can get Mystic Man then to move 0 to 1. So we could just play that card and leave him there and then draw another one. But we want to move him, okay? And then as a result, you may complete a mission. So why not? Definitely. I guess one reason is you might not want to is because, again, you're limited to having 3 up here for each character. You can replace a tile that's a lower value if you have 3 up here, and you could replace this one, right? Let's say all 3 of these were $1 ones, and you came across a 2, you could replace a lower valued one with a higher valued one. But you're only able to have 3 on any given character, and then you immediately replace that. So again, that's going to count towards my scoring at the end of the game. So fast forward, everybody's been doing similar things. So throughout the game, various characters have, right, completed missions. We have, all right, so let's just throw a bunch of these up here. Okay, it's going to look something like this. And then we've reached the end. Bear with me here. Might look something like this. Probably a few more money tiles out there, typically, or payment tiles. A few of these out here, maybe some more assassinations, so on and so forth. Let's say let's say things looked like this. And of course, I would have drawn another card. Okay, so we've gone through, and then let's say all the character cards, the last one had been drawn. Okay. Then we go to the end and we tally up the scoring. So everybody reveals their Spy Society. And so in other words, any Spy Society character cards that hadn't been turned over already because that character was assassinated, they're revealed. So I reveal, hey, you guys never assassinated these, right? Mystic Man, and then Paula Perry. And so I go up here. And so I would have 1 plus 1 is 2, plus then these. So 6 is 8, but minus 5. So my total will be 3. Everybody else does the exact same thing. Compare totals, and the winner is whoever ends with the highest total. And I actually can't remember what the tiebreaker is. Probably most payment tiles, most in terms of their payment tiles. But that's really the gist of the game. Real quick to go through, how these different, what the different actions are. So a punch means that, again, Guy Gay actually was assassinated, but let's say he wasn't. So you could punch anyone. Actually, you can't do it where the police are, right? Let's say we were here and not here where the police dude is. And we played this. We could punch either Mystic Man or Jill Jenkins. And we might have various reasons for doing either, right? But let's say we then punch Jill Jenkins. So then Jill Jenkins goes to the hospital. And that's basically the gist of that, right? So that was punch. We talked about movements, right? It's specifying a character again, and that's how far you can move. So there are different movement amounts, distances, I guess, whatever would be the right way to put that. Connection just means, that's actually a really good card. So that means you can do any of the other actions with Alice Angel. So whether it be assassinate, steal is one we didn't talk about. So of course we talked about assassinate. Again, anybody on the same location, you can assassinate them. Where's steal? Anyway, there's steals in here, I promise. Somewhere, there's one. So Maria Marie, where are you, Maria? There's Maria Marie at the biker club. So if I played this, I could steal from any other character on the same location. Well, that worked out because Teddy Tuna does have something. So I can then, right, take one payment tile from Teddy Tuna's account and move it to Maria Marie's. Okay, so that's how steal works, and I think we went through all of them. So that's really the gist of it. Again, I really like this one. It's again, deduction, sort of hidden identities. It's simple. I played this one with my kids, with family and friends, and it's been pretty well received. So another one I like, again, quite a bit. And there's a lot of variability in terms of the setup and how the game plays out. And one of the cool things is the game length is actually pretty similar regardless of how many players you have, because you're going through the payment tiles and the character cards, with the same frequency basically. Anyway, that's Spy Society. Are you ready for some football? Here we have game 22, Fantasy Football, the board game. And I've got to say, this is the 7th video I've recorded now of these games, and this is the one that got me most excited. It's been a few years since I've played this, and so some of the players are out of date, so I have to say some of this might have to do with the fact that the football season just started. So I've always been a huge football fan, and getting this back out, getting prepared to do this recording, I just got super excited for this one. I remembered how much fun this one is, and so like I was saying, it's been a few years, so the player cards that I have, the players that are involved in the game, none of the current ones, or at least some of the the more recent current stars, they're not in the game. So I'm excited to update this game, to actually get some friends over and start playing it again. So this one I'm super excited about. In fact, if I were to say if I ever become a millionaire, my prediction is it has something to do with this game. This one, in my mind, has always had a ton of potential, and I say, I talk about a millionaire because particularly I think it has a lot of potential with respect to the NFL. If the NFL were ever to catch wind of this, of course it's my game, so I'm a little bit biased here, but I think I really might have something here. Now, I did look into this at one point, contacting them and letting them know about this game and so on. But the barrier of entry to sort of even get in contact with anyone meaningful in the NFL is almost impossible. You have to basically have some sort of history in the business industry, or some sort of history with the NFL itself, to even get in touch with anyone. So I basically gave that up. But long story short, and what I'm getting to is, again, I think very highly of this game's potential, particularly to be implemented online, and the customization involved in this. So it's called Fantasy Football, the board game. There's just so much variability. You could easily implement it online. I could see people like myself, the NFL is extremely popular. People getting on and, forming leagues and playing, an online version of this. Again, it's called Fantasy Football, the board game, because there's a lot of elements of the game that are reminiscent of fantasy football. All right, so not only do you have the NFL players over the years and throughout history, but then you have the construction of your team as well, which you can do in various ways. You could have a draft, a la fantasy football. You could have an auction based on how good the players are, so they have different ratings. I'll get more into that in a moment. But so again, that sort of speaks to the naming of the game and the fact that football fans would really get into just how much you can customize things. Not only your roster and who your coach is, but also your playbook and the schemes that I guess the schemes stay the same, but the playbook is even customizable. So lots going on here, a lot of potential. Again, I'm a huge football fan, and it is my game, so I'm a little bit biased. But let's go ahead and dive in. Before we get into the details, I am going to read a quick overview here of the game. So fantasy football is a two-player football game where each player takes control of one team. Players first draft teams by selecting players from those available and placing the players' corresponding player cards on their side of the game board, and then pit them against each other. Each team must draft 10 positions, 5 on offense, QB, running back, tight end, wide receiver, and offensive line, and 5 on defense, defensive lineman, middle linebacker, outside linebacker, cornerback, and safety, as well as a head coach. Each player in the game is rated in 8 categories corresponding to the position he plays. For example, all quarterbacks have ratings for awareness, reliability, clutch, arm strength, technique, short pass accuracy, long pass accuracy, and run/scramble. Head coaches have special team ratings associated with them, and some also have unique traits, for example, defensive genius, which offer various powerful advantages during gameplay. A game consists of 4 quarters. Each quarter consists of 10 plays. During each play, both the offense and the defense must choose a formation and a scheme which will modify the outcome of the play. An offensive play card and a defensive play card corresponding to the offensive scheme chosen, for example, inside run, are also drawn, and these in turn indicate specific player ratings from both teams that will affect the outcome of the play as well. During the different phases of a play, teams may also play tactics cards, which grant significant special abilities that can be used once during the game. Naturally, the winner of the game is the team with the most points at the end of the game. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the details a little bit more here. So I mentioned the customization here. First of all, there's the roster construction, which is super fun. At least if you're into fantasy football like I am. So I've created. There's just so much potential in terms of the players you can use. In fact, I kept some of these out. You can fill these in. You can just put whatever you want in. Although the ratings are from 0 to 7. So you'll notice. Let's remove guy with no name here. Actually on the board are just free agents. And so you could actually just stick with the free agent who's terrible and say focus on, depending on how you're creating your roster, depending on the requirements and so on. There are these free agents, which are just zeros across the board, so they could technically be in the game. But usually you'll draft players or acquire other, player cards to, put in lieu of the free agents, which are better, oftentimes significantly better. But at least slightly better. If you have a guy with no name, I guess he's a little bit better than a free agent. But as I was saying, they're rated from 0 to 7 in the 8 stat categories that correspond to their position. And so again, you could just create your own player. Actually, I included myself here, of course. And so you'll notice these 2 green cubes. Those correspond to our coach and his special trait. So I've gone ahead and done that. Green means +1. And the red cube, so those we'll gain these throughout the game. Players can, their teams can, specifically the players, and specifically particular attributes on the players. Right, you'll modify them basically. Reds -1, greens +1. So basically, my favorite player of all time and myself, we start, Barry Sanders is already legendary, but we start even better basically than we normally would thanks to our coach and his special trait, motivator. So our clutch, Brad Musil's clutch, is actually 4, not 3, and Barry Sanders' speed is actually an 8 to start the game and not 7. So anyway, you can, construct these rosters however you want. So let's go ahead and actually just introduce our starting lineups here. So I've got, unlike all the other games that we are going through, this one's 2-player or 2 teams. I guess you could have a group playing on each side. And what I did for the purposes of this video is I gave each team basically a salary of 42. So there's different, means of constructing your roster, as I mentioned, that are outlined and suggested, but I just said, okay, let's go with the salary 42. So in other words, all these stars will add up to 42, including the coach. And so each position, you have starting from free agent, which is a 0, going all the way up to, 7 times 8 would be 56. I don't think there's any 56s in the game. There's like 5 or 6 that I have that are 50s, and those are like legendary. So they have super high ratings basically across the board. But then you have, so it varies basically in each position. Each player is sort of given a general descriptor depending on how high his ratings are. And then sort of a sum star, how do I want to put that? This number at the bottom is based on these 8, attributes. And there's a certain, if it's between these numbers, then it's 1. If it's between these numbers, it's 2, and so on. And that determines then, right? So let's say 20 to 25 is a 3-star rating quarterback. And so that's important because when you construct the teams, right, you have to stay below a certain salary if you're doing like a fantasy football construction. And so again, our roster, our 10 players plus our coach adds up to 42. So at quarterback, we have yours truly, and we have the best player of all time, Barry Sanders, at running back. You might have heard of Jerry Rice, a really good receiver. Tank blocker. So again, you're free to do whatever you want. I created a bunch of weirdos here. Guy with no name. Reggie White, legendary defensive lineman. We have a pretty good stacked offense for the most part, and then a not so good defense because we threw a bunch of musicians in here. So we have Dre and Eminem in at linebackers. So we're not doing too great there. And then Deion Sanders, pretty good at cornerback. So opponents should watch the passes. And then Jim Morrison, not so sure about his football background. And then on the other side, we have Elvis Presley at quarterback, Elmo at running back, Julio Jones, who is still in the NFL, Big Bird at, what is Big Bird playing? Tight end, Andre the Giant at O-line, Bruce Smith, another legendary D-line. And so the opponent here went all in on their defense, you might notice. So Bruce Smith, Ray Lewis at middle linebacker, Lawrence Taylor, most of us have heard of Lawrence Taylor, another legendary. He has outside linebacker. Charles Woodson, Hall of Fame cornerback. They did go, they're a little weaker at safety position with the board game designer. If you've been paying attention, my favorite designer of all time, Wolfgang Kramer, he's playing safety in fantasy football, the board game. And so then again, our coaches, John Madden and Vince Lombardi. Coaches affect gameplay in terms of, we'll get into awareness here in a second, but sort of special teams. So if there's one maybe possible criticism of the game. So one thing I did have to do is streamline things quite a bit. I used to have penalties involved, die rolling, so on and so forth, right? But I wanted a quick game. Another feature of this game is it plays in well under an hour. So one thing I had to sort of end up getting rid of, in addition to penalties, was special teams, or at least I streamlined them significantly. So coaches pretty much determine, your field goal range, how you punt, and where the other team, sort of your kick coverage, where the other team will start after a kickoff. So none of that is actually done in the game. There's no like a play associated with it, just kind of automatically determined by the coaches involved. So for example, when I kick it off, my opponent will start at the 20-yard line. When I punt it, it will go exactly 55 yards. And then I can kick a field goal within 55 yards, which is actually the longest range in the game. So that's pretty good. So John Madden, he offers the longest field goal range. And so you can see then Vince Lombardi, a great coach in his own right, actually even better than John Madden here. Of course, it's upside down, but you can see that he has similar stats. And his bonus is very significant. Offensive genius, So basically, the other team gets to add +1 to their play strength anytime they're on offense. So that's a huge bonus. And Bill Belichick, if you're familiar with him, he has that same special ability, except his is on defense. So big boost there, which is good because they have Elmo at running back and Big Bird and so on. So they're not looking too hot on offense otherwise. So that'll be good that they get a little boost from Vince Lombardi. But anyway, so the coaches, they do definitely play a role. And then the special traits, which I just explained what Vince Lombardi's was, those can be very significant and very much affect gameplay in significant ways. So the other thing they have is awareness. So you'll notice, again, there's offensive awareness and defensive awareness. So before the game starts, the awareness, every player and coach has an awareness attribute. So the 5 on offense would apply to offense, and the 5 on defense would apply to defense, and the coach has an offense and a defense, right? And the only time the awareness affects anything, unlike the other 7 attributes, is at the very beginning of the game, and then awareness won't really come into play. And the way it works is you add up. So this is, again, before the game. Each player does this. You add up. So we do offense first. 5 plus 7 is 12, plus 7 is 19, right? Plus 4 is 23. So we consult this chart here, and since we have 23, it falls in here. We get 4 offensive tactics cards to start the game, and so voila, you'll notice I've already done that. And again, these are gonna help you tweak gameplay or affect gameplay in significant, dramatic ways at times. So these are the 4 we drew. Right, and of course, a lot of this probably won't make too much sense since we haven't gone through like gameplay yet. But again, these will significantly affect gameplay. The opponent is doing the same thing with respect to his or her offense, and then we do the same thing with our defense, and they will do the same thing with their defense. So we would add up. So what do we have here? We start with our deal. We have 7, 8, 15. Gosh, 19. Had a mental fart there. 23. So again, 23. 4, so we should have 4 as well. Did I screw that up? 7, 8 plus 7 is 15, plus 4 is 19, plus 4 is 23. Yeah, we should have another defensive tactic card in there. Anyway, so we should have, where did I put them? Over here? Draw another one. And then the opponent did the same thing, so we start with that, and then we're actually ready to go. So the way the regular gameplay works, so I mentioned the kickoffs, those are kind of streamlined. So let's say the opponent is going to start with the ball. They would start at the 20-yard line. You notice our handy little football here. And let's say they have the ball, so maybe they put it over here. Right, so we have our little 10-yard marker to help illustrate where they need to go for a first down. So just like real life, they have 4 downs to get 10 yards. And so the way this works then, so I mentioned playbooks and the customization of that. I guess let me say a little bit more about that. There's a standard playbook. So we talked about tactics. We'll set that aside. So the rule, I guess real quick on tactics, you can play 1 tactics card per play during the game. And by the way, we have quarters are, again, 10 plays per quarter. Field goals, kickoffs, punts, those do not count as plays. So the only things that count as plays is first down, second down, third down, all right, and fourth down if you go for it, but not if you punt. Okay, so anytime we're basically putting a formation card out and a scheme card, etc., those are the plays. So getting back to this, then I just used the standard playbook here. So we have, and that's indicated by the asterisk here. So in other words, if you have somebody that's not really that familiar with football, I would just give them this basic, right, playbook. And so you get 4 on offense, 4 on defense. So on offense, right, you could come out in the goal line, I formation, single back, or shotgun. And one thing I wanted to show then is that we actually have over here, for somebody a little bit more familiar with football, right, you have actually, so before the game, you could substitute one of these in for these other sets, right, depending on whatever parameters you've agreed to play with. Maybe you can expand your playbook to 7 formations, whatever, right? So there's these other ones as well, which will, again, affect the outcome of the play in various ways. So, but again, we'll go back and keep things simple. So there's these 4 basic offensive formations. Then you'll have offensive scheme cards. And these are always the same. Okay. Short pass. inside run, outside run, short pass, and long pass. Okay, and you'll notice long pass comes with like inherently the lowest sort of value, whereas inside run has the highest, but the payoff, right, the overall reward is possibly greatest with long pass. So that kind of gets offset in that sense. But this will make more sense here in a moment as well. So on offense, you have the formations and the schemes. And then similarly on defense, you have something very similar going on. Okay, we have, I've just kept it simple here again. So 4-3, goal line, nickel and dime. Okay, so again, basic standard playbook indicated by the asterisk, but we do have all sorts of other defensive formations that are available, which will then affect gameplay in various ways. If you have someone that's, you know, a little bit more familiar with football, we have other dime formations in there as well. But those are the 4 standard ones. And then on defense, you actually have 8 schemes. You have inside run coverage, which is a little safer. Then you have inside run blitz, which if you really think, right, they're going inside run, you can play it a little more aggressively. But then if you're wrong, it's going to hurt you a little bit more. Then outside run, you have a couple options again. And then short pass, a couple options. Basically, you can pick one of the 4 offensive schemes and then play it, kind of go safer against that or more aggressive, right? Safer, more aggressive, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens, okay, so I kind of explained that stuff in general. So what's going to happen is, let's say that, so they're on offense. They're going to come out and they're going to start by playing an offensive formation face up. So they come out in the single back normal. So I know a few things as a defensive player right off the bat, right? Their base, sort of not without knowing what they're actually going to call, what play they're going to call, right? This formation that they're coming out in is going to, you know, it's going to boost if they choose short pass, and it's going to be a detriment if they pick outside run. But hey, right? It's kind of the mind game. Maybe they're coming out in this and they're actually going to run, thinking that we're not likely to focus on it because of this. Who knows, right? That's part of the strategy. Right, some of the mind games going on. So they come out with that, and then what we do is on defense, okay, it's 1st down and 10, game just started, literally first play of the game. Okay, let's kind of, we don't want to go do anything too extreme. You know, I think he or she's going to start with a pass, but I don't want to commit too much, so we're probably going to go short pass coverage. But first we actually have to pick our formation. This would be extremely run heavy. We're not sure about that. These are more pass, so we're going to stay in the middle here, probably with 4-3. So what we do is we come out and we lay that face up, and then I mentioned we're going to go short pass coverage, and we put this face down. And then finally, the offense picks what they're going to do, okay, and reveal that. That's how a play normally goes. Now, of course, there's these different tactics cards, which they'll show at what point during these plays or during the gameplay that they can be played. Those might, you know, tweak things a bit, but that's generally how a play works. And so what happens then is the defense says, okay, well, here's what I did. Ha! Perfect, right? So the offense, let's say the offense is yellow on over here. So this is tracking the offense and defense play strength, okay? And then we have the scoreboard over here. I guess I could have said that earlier. So we have down, quarter, time remaining. So again, remember, every quarter in a standard game at least has 10 plays. So what did I say? I forgot already. Let's say yellow is offense. And so we would add, since they picked short pass, they got a +1. Okay, if they would have picked something else, then it would have been different, right? But so they're going to start with a +1 and then +3. So that's +4. Okay, and that's before we draw a player card. Okay, and then we go and we do the same thing. So they pick short pass, so -1, but +2, so we're actually at +1, so we'll go 1 here. Now, things get interesting as well. This is where our players come into play. So the offense would pick short pass, and they would draw the next card. Ooh, so what this means is you're actually gonna, that's crazy. So there's only a few of these in each deck, okay? And what this means is actually you're gonna draw 2 ultimately. So normally you would just draw 1, but this is saying, no, draw an extra. So we're going to go wide receiver route running. So we would look at their wide receiver route running, which is a 2. So they would add 2, 1, 2. And now, since they have extra effort, normally that would be it. But since they have that extra effort, they're going to draw another one, wide receiver speed. So we come over here, Julio Jones again, and his speed is a 4. I know it's hard to see upside down. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now on defense, we would draw a short pass defense card, and it's going to indicate, okay, in this play, the DL pass rushing is what matters. Great, because we have Reggie White. Pass rushing, even better, right? Specifically, one of the probably the best pass rusher of all time, arguably. So we got 7. That kind of saved us. Otherwise, it was going to be pretty iffy there. So 1 plus 7 is 8. And so after that, we had a net gain since the offense is 2 higher than the defense. The offense gained 2 yards. So they would go 1, 2. All right, it would be second down and 8. We would adjust this. There'd be 9 plays remaining in the quarter, right? Take that stuff back. So I'd take my formation card, my scheme card back. They'd take that stuff back. And we'd do the same thing. So then it's second and 8. All right, they would come out in a certain formation. Let's say they come out in the pistol. So they got to start with a non-standard formation. And so then, right, I would say, that's interesting. The pistol, it's a little bit more maybe pass friendly. Let's go, nickel, and then the scheme. I think they're going to pass again. Let's play some long pass coverage. All right, so that again is face down. Then they would pick their scheme. Where are the schemes? Here we go. Let's see what they randomly got. Outside run. We do the same thing. So I'm not going to, so I guess real quick, right? Outside run, -3. Then we reveal this. Not looking so good. -4, right? So that's why these can go negative. And then outside run +2, and then the outside run over here would be -2. So they'd start at 0. Right, but you can see how even by doing something that starts negative, you can still end up with an advantage going into the player card draw. And speaking of the player card draw, so you kind of saw how, right, those work. So it's not always, all right, that's going to tell you just reshuffle all that. It's not always going to be wide receiver on short pass. Here we have O-line pass blocking. So you don't know which player or which attribute for that matter will matter. There are certain ones there's a certain percentage, right? So going in for a short pass, the running back's not going to be as involved, right? There's going to be way more wide receiver, tight end, O-line cards here, right? But that doesn't mean that a running back one won't show up. And actually, so in the playbook here, at the end, there's a lot of information in terms of, the distribution of the quarterbacks and their attribute ratings in all 4 of these schemes, so on with the running back, wide receiver, each position, and vice versa as well with the defense. So there's a lot of strategy, really. There's a lot of strategy that goes into this, in terms of how do you want to construct your team. Like I said, maybe, this guy or this opponent went super heavy on defense. It's going to be hard to move the ball against them, right? Alternatively, you might invest heavily in offense, which is kind of where we went at the 3 main offensive positions, at least in terms of scoring: QB, running back, and wide receiver. I guess that dude's not so great. He's average, but those are pretty good running backs and wide receivers right there. So, if you want to have like a run-focused team, you could set up your, invest in certain positions and, get certain formations in your playbook, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot in terms of that customization, like I said. And just in quarterbacks here, you can see just how variable and how nuanced the players can be. Again, you can update these every year. So thinking ahead, right, when the NFL finally discovers this and contacts me, right, you could release every year, a new set with all the new players. You can have the legend sets where you get, the studs. You can create your own players. Again, you could have league play. You could implement this with college as well. And of course, none of that would matter if the gameplay itself wasn't decent, but hopefully you can kind of see how it really kind of does mirror football, I think. How you come out with formations and scheming things a certain way, and there's certain tendencies, but you never really know what's going to happen. Then also, I almost forgot to mention the game breakers, the most thrilling part of the game. I think on average we had, let's say, 2 to 5 of these happen throughout a game. So what happens is if the offense ever gets a play strength advantage of 11 or higher, then they've triggered a game break, basically a game breaker. And so you go to this chart. I'll explain that here in a second. It also works for the defense. If the defense, so in other words, if the offense, let's say it started, so what was this, -4, right? Somewhere like this, it's obviously right a difference of say 11 on offense, then that would trigger an offensive game breaker. Let's say it was something like this though. Somehow the defense created a huge advantage going into the play. Well then, right, we have a defensive game breaker. So this is again after you've added all the factors that go into the play strength, including the player cards and so on. If that's the difference, well then we've got a game breaker. So depending on whether it's offense or defense, we'll start with the offensive scenario. So again, yellow was way ahead here in terms of the strength. So we've triggered, let's make it a little more realistic here. We've triggered this, and let's say it was on a run and the attribute that mattered was tight end. So what happens is, so we have a difference of 14 to start with. Then, since it's a game breaker and the tight end's involved, we look at the tight end. Well, shoot, Big Bird's probably not going to have a high clutch. He doesn't. He only has a 1. So we look at the player, and out there were more than, let's say, an extra effort card had been drawn and there was more than one player involved. You can pick the player with the highest clutch rating. So basically you're adding your play strength advantage, which was, what did I say, 14 here, plus the clutch rating of one of the players involved. So here it would be 1. So 15 is the result. We would consult this here. So again, this was on an outside run, and we had a 15. So in that case, we ended up with a 55-yard gain. So that is what enabled me to have the big plays, right? A lot, because I didn't want them to happen all the time, but I wanted these moments where you triggered these huge, massive plays, and this fine tweaking this notion of the game breaker that finally let me do that. And so you can see how then we get 55-yard plays. And so I was going back, the outside run and long pass have the lowest sort of base strength, if you will. But the upside is the highest, though. You'll notice which one of these has the most TDs possible, long pass, right? Which had the lowest base strength. Now, defense works the exact same way, except it's like, with the defense, so you'd factor in the defensive player involved, his clutch plus the difference, and consult the defensive game breaker chart. So you could have a turnover, and then they'd also lose 5 yards, and it would be your ball, right? Or even possibly a turnover with a touchdown. And the last thing that happens on a game breaker is you got to also, let's go back to that offensive one, right? You got to boost any attribute on the player involved that you use the clutch rating for. It doesn't have to be clutch or speed. It can be any of those 8 attributes, right? So you could boost his measly strength and boost it up to a 1. And then additionally, you got to put a -1 on any attribute belonging to the player, the defensive player that was involved. So let's say it was the DL, right? The opponent could say, I'm going to put a -1 on your clutch. So now Reggie White's clutch, until that's modified further, is a 6. So that is Fantasy Football, the board game. We get a lot here. We went through a lot. There's just so much depth to this game and the customization. And so if you're a football fan like me, I could just, if there was an online version of this game, I'm again, easy for me to say, but I would be playing it all the time probably. Again, I can imagine league play. Think about the statistics involved for like a statistics nerd like myself. So this one, needless to say, got a ton of play over the years. I haven't brought it back out for a while. That actually got me thinking I want to call some buddies up and get them over here. But I have like memories of actually one time going up to Nebraska for a fantasy football draft, and the whole day before that night's draft, we had a tournament with this, and so we all gathered around the table and played our matches. And again, the plays in generally I'd say 45 minutes, but we had then a fantasy football, the board game tournament, and also a draft preceding that, right, to get our specific players. And we did all that then before the actual fantasy football draft that night. So lots of You can see here where I was originally sort of messing around with how the plays would work and the attributes involved for the various positions. Just so much here. I have, different times we played and what the score was. I went back and looked. We had scores. They're pretty realistic scores. So here was 10-0. We had a 28-14. We had a 3-0 game once. I saw, 35-21. So they really do sort of run the gamut in terms of scores as well. Again, I was mentioning this earlier. If maybe there's a little nitpick, it's the streamlining of the special teams, but it also allows the game to play much faster. So there aren't any real field goals. You can just say on 4th down within the field goal range, right? If I had the ball, let's say my opponent's 40, I could say on 4th down, I'm just going to kick a field goal. So I would get 3 points, right? Modify the score, and then they would start the ball again on their 20, okay? And again, field goals, punts, kickoffs, those don't affect the time remaining. It's only when you're actually drawing these cards, setting up a formation, so on. So there's thought I would show real quick the playbook. I mean, there's just so much involved in this game. It really does bring back a lot of memories going through this. The tactics. So again, the awareness at the beginning and determining the tactics. There's all these various, I was going to go through our tactics cards, but this is already a long enough video. But these actually dramatically, right? You can really plan when to use your tactics cards, and you can really set yourself up for, possibly a game breaker, a huge play. Of course, your opponent's able to do the same thing. And I mentioned, right, where I have the information in terms of which positions affect which schemes in what proportions and so on. It's hard to even say, but there's the information, right? It's all there for the players, not only for when they're playing, but also when they're constructing that roster. So again, I think that's one of the really cool things about the game is that there's almost a game within the game in terms of just constructing your roster as well, if you get into that. If not, you could just find a quicker way to set up teams, right? You don't have to sit there and draft the players either. But that's it. I said a lot here. That's Fantasy Football, the board game. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I've now got game number 28, Jack Bradley Racing, on the table. So the backstory behind this is when my son Jack was 3 and my oldest at the time was 4.5, my daughter Abby, I got it in my head for whatever reason, I want to make a game for each of these kids, for those 2 kids. So this was the outcome basically of that attempt. So I made Jack Bradley Racing for my son, and then a Princess Adventure for Abby. And they both turned out pretty good, especially I'd say this one. I really like this one because, as I'll read the descriptor here in a second, but as I mentioned there, it's basically simple enough for really 3 and 4-year-olds to play. It's really that simple. And yet it offers enough to it that even gamers, parents can get something out of it. It's not just a mindless exercise. So I'll quickly read a sort of an overview, and then we'll get into. There's really not a whole lot to it. Again, it's pretty straightforward. That's one of the sort of nice things about it, I think. But we'll get into kind of the nuances of it as well. So Jack Bradley Racing is a game for 2 to 6 players that was designed to be accessible to almost all ages, while still offering enough meaningful choices to keep seasoned gamers interested. The basic game is simple enough to be played by young children. Each round consists of 2 phases, draft and move. Beginning with the player who is currently in last place, players draft a new card to take into their hand. They always have 3 cards in hand at this point. They will have 2 at the completion of the round. Players then each choose 1 card from their hand to play for the round and place it face down in front of them. Cards are simultaneously revealed, and players take turns moving their car on the track according to the cards played. Besides the variable tracks, the cards are the key component. Cards reveal 2 numbers, one determining awareness, i.e. turn order, and another determining speed, i.e. the number of spaces on the track players may move. The catch is that cards higher in speed yield a lower position in the turn order. This can be especially problematic when vying for good position, for example around turns, as a player may get cut off on the track so that he is unable to move forward and thus unable to move all the spaces he is permitted. This yields strategic decisions regarding when to play conservative and go for good positioning on the track versus play aggressive and try to burn by opponents. Ultimately, races are almost always close all the way to the end, thanks to the core mechanics. Last place players select first during the drafting of new cards, and the benefit of moving more spaces is offset by less optimal positioning. An additional set of tactics cards are offered in the advanced game. These cards allow players to perform special actions during the course of play, adding a layer of depth for those who desire a deeper experience. So let's go ahead and get into it a little bit more. Actually, in the overview, I really did kind of articulate everything there is to the game. So, as usual, I've got a 3-player game set up. We've got Dad's always yellow, typically, and then Jack would, when we played this, basically a decade ago, when he was 3 and 4. Not quite that long ago, but it's been a while. Anyway, he would always be red, and then let's say Abby's playing, she'd be green. Now, some tracks, it's just like a long route, and that's it. But some are like, the track, and so you can decide at the outset how many laps you want to do, and so you have a lap counter. And so you'll notice, again, there's spots here to start. So Dad took the first spot, and then red there, and then green here. And to offset that, just like as is the case in the game itself every round, the player who's in the furthest space back, they're going to actually get to draw the card that they add to their hand first. So they're going to get a first dibs basically on what they're adding to their hand. So again, that dynamic always kind of helps keep everybody somewhat close. And so every player starts the game with 2 cards in hand. So let's see what we've got here. These are the 2 we'd start in hand. Again, these are kept private. And so at the beginning of each round, the player who's last, and so if they're sort of the same this way, it's the outside then would be sort of considered the last position, right? First is always furthest ahead and inside. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would be the case all the way around then when trying to figure out basically who gets to draft their next card first. It's always, again, the one that's furthest behind, and hopefully that made sense how you figure that out. So basically green, let's say Abby's over here. Green would get to pick their card first. So let's say she just picks this. She wants something kind of in between. And then it would be red, who's Jack. So he would add, let's say this. And then I would take this and add it to my hand. Again, they're not seeing these. They would know I just drew that, but that's it. Then the second part right at the beginning here is we all choose one of those 3 cards then that we have in hand to play. So we're going to put these face down. This is going to be the one we picked. And then Jack would do the same. Say he picked this one. So then we all reveal at the same time. What Jack get here? So what this means, now this means you can either go 1 space or draw a tactic card. Now the tactic card's only in the advanced game. So set that aside for a second. Basically this is a 6 and a 1 for our purposes right now. So you'll notice the cards, they have basically values of 1 to 6 over in awareness, and then similarly 1 to 6 over for speed. And those are the 2 values. It's pretty straightforward. All the racing cards, right, those are the 2 values they have. Now, what do these numbers indicate? Awareness is going to determine sort of who gets to go first, right? And the catch is the lower the awareness, the further back, right, in line basically that you get to go that turn. So in other words, you want higher values for basically both of these, right? So again, the trade-off is the cards with higher speed that allow you to go further on the track have a lower awareness, hence you're going to have to go later in that round. Okay, so you might get blocked off and you won't get as good positioning. So in this case, who had the highest awareness? It would be Jack with his 6, so he would get to go first. And again, he's red, so he gets to go 1. Boom, he would go there, let's say. Then it would be Abby with her 2, so she gets to go, in this case, 5. So she might go, and you can't go normally through any spaces that have cars in them. So it would have to be something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, or she could go 3, 4, 5. Maybe she wants to cut Dad off because look, that made things really difficult for me, right? So, and actually they would discard then these cards after they play them, so that at the end of each round you'll be back down to 2 cards. Right, so then Dad's left. I get to go move 6 spaces, but they made things awfully tricky here, so I would have to actually go kind of backwards. Well, let's say I started back here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I'd go 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's make sure I got that right. So I started here, and I got to go 6 because my speed's 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? And so I discard that. Then we draw 3 new ones. Boom, 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 boom. And in this case, Jack's last now. I think Abby was last to begin with, but now Jack's last, so he would pick his card first. Let's see, you want this one, and then Abby would be second, so she would pick next. Dad would go last. All right, we'd do it again. That's literally it. And so, again, simple enough that 4 and 5, 3, even 3-year-olds, right, could play this. I mean, it's that straightforward. There's just these 2 basic numbers. Now, could they understand the tactics if they're that young? Maybe not, but these basic numbers, right, there's not a lot to it. Hey, this one tells me, right, I want higher number because then I got to go first. This one tells me how far I got to go. Obviously I want a higher number there too. Higher number is always better. This one tells me when I got to go. This one tells me how far I got to go. Okay, and so again, you just have all these cards are just the different, right, awareness and speed values basically. And so you do have the different tracks, which is cool. And so we even did like a circuit or like a season where we would keep track of who won at each track, and then add up the points across the series or circuit and had like an overall winner based on that. So there's just really infinite sort of design layouts. I tried to again keep them simple and keep them to like 1 page where I could print it out on 1 page just using my basic knowledge of Word and whatnot. So I also want to mention tactics. So if you do play with the advanced game, the tactics cards is instead of going 1, if you play one of these cards, right, you can instead draw a tactics card, which they let you do all sorts of various things, right, and they're just self-explanatory. So you can use them at any point henceforward, and then you would just discard them after use. So they just let you, like one of them, right, you can tweak things a little bit. One of them, I don't know if it's going to come, oh, right here, that's the one I was thinking of. Let you go through, right, occupied spaces. Now you can't land on the same turn, but that way, right, that would have been awesome to have when I started here. If I had a 6, right, I could just go right through there. I would have ended up a lot further than having to go around. So those tactics cards definitely throw in a nice little wrinkle once the kids, or whoever really, gets used to the base game. They're easy enough to toss in then. There's not a lot that's changed other than when you can get them. And the trade-off, right, a lot of times they're probably going to be worth taking a tactics card instead of just going 1 space. And then they can be pretty powerful. And again, you can use them. They're a one-time use. You just discard them when you use them. But you can use them at any point from that point forward. So really straightforward, really simple. And yet there's enough to the gameplay to keep things interesting. So that's Jack Bradley Racing. Do you like beer? No doubt many human beings do. I don't drink beer quite like I used to, for sure. But there certainly was a time when I enjoyed not just beer, but microbrews in particular. And maybe some of you have tried your hand at brewing, not just drinking, microbrews, but actually, brewing your own beer. I haven't actually tried that myself, but I did create a game at one point about brewing beers, and so that's what this is. So this is game number 21, Microbrewin. This is actually one of the 3 that the publisher that I'll discuss in part 7 that I had communication with. This is one of the 3 games that publisher expressed interest in, and it's been one of the more popular ones over the years. It's gone through extensive playtesting, and I guess one thing that I would observe about this one is it's maybe as a result of that playtesting, it's received some, it's an example of a game that you can kind of fine tune over the years and really, polish. I think most of the stuff that was around at the beginning is still here, but there are little changes. You can see this is an older board, but you can see that, changes have been made over the years. So this round actually, the activity or action selection, it occurs first, then resolution, and then it's called bookkeeping. That what's called preparation on this original board. So I guess the upshot is how the round works has been tweaked. So this is an older board, actually my first board I made for the game. In the game over the years, there's another example, essential ingredient tokens, those little white tokens. Those weren't in the first iteration of the game, but actually that was one of the things one of my friends who has what's the word, has been nice enough, I guess, just to play a lot of my games over the years. It was one of his recommendations. And I'll go into that in more detail, but just wanted to mention here at the outset, this is an example of a game that did receive some sort of fine-tuning over the years, and it's sort of interesting to reflect back on that. But anyway, before we go into sort of how the game works, I will go ahead and read the overview for the game. So are you ready to brew your way to fame and recognition? In Microbrewin, you vie for fame in the brewing industry, aspiring to gain local, regional, national, and if you're truly legendary, worldwide recognition. You do this primarily by brewing high-quality beers, which will require you to acquire ingredients from a limited supply market. This market offers 4 essential ingredients: water, hops, malted grain, and yeast, in addition to a variety of adjuncts and special ingredients to help enhance the flavor of your beers. For example, coffee, chocolate, and corn. Additionally, you might consider improving your brewery's equipment. Doing so will improve the quality of all of your beers. Don't forget to factor in advertising, contests, festivals, and research opportunities. Thanks to the wide variety of ingredients for brewing beers and the various avenues available for earning fame and recognition, it's unlikely that you will ever brew the same beer twice, or that 2 games of Microbrewin will ever feel the same. So let's go ahead and dive in to the game itself. So as I've been doing here, I've set it up for a 3-player game. In Microbrewin, it's pretty straightforward in terms of the game structure and how long the game lasts. It's 16 rounds. It's always going to be 16 rounds, and you're always going to do basically 2 actions or activities or whatever you want to call them each round. So you'll actually have then 32 actions, you might say, over the course of each game of Microbrewin. So that's always going to stay the same, unlike some of my other games, which can end in a variety of different ways and might have varying game lengths as a result. The game length might vary still here, but in terms of how the game will end, it'll always be the same. It's always carried out over 4 years and 4 seasons within each year, hence. So basically, each of those is a round. So in year 1, we go here, 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 here. So 4 rounds in year 1, essentially 4 rounds in year 2, 4 rounds in year 3, and 4 rounds in year 4. For a total, right, of 16 rounds in the game. Okay, so in each round, each season, players are essentially doing the same thing. They are taking, so each player is a certain color. So we have blue over here. This is the first player marker as well. And we have green over here. And we have us, or myself, red here. And each player will have a brewery board as well. And then also they'll keep track of their points. It's called fame here. I might have tweaked what it's called over the years as well. And so once you get to 100, you go back there and you will go up, and that's actually then sort of your general status improves then, and you can get rewarded for that at the end of each year. It's one of the things you can earn additional than fame for. So anyway, each player has all of those things at the beginning of the game, and so one of the things they have are these 2, action selection pieces. And so basically how the game works, it's really straightforward for the most part. So again, there's the 16 rounds. What are players doing? So at the beginning, players are taking turns, beginning with the first player and proceeding clockwise. They are going to select one activity. Activity being one of the 8 different numbered locations on the board. Okay. I believe, except for number 1, where only 1 player can go, all the others can have infinite player action pieces on. Now, the players, when it comes to resolving each of those activities, it might turn out that the player can't resolve the action for whatever reason. But when in this part of the round, when putting action pieces or their action pieces out there, you can put them on, any number of player pieces can be at any particular activity location, with the exception of number 1. So we're taking turns one by one, beginning with the first player, putting our action tokens out here. Okay, and then we would do the same thing with our second one. So maybe they go here, and we go here, and then green decides to go here as well. So then what happens, it's the next phase of the round. So that was kind of phase one, if you will, activity selection. Then we actually go around in order around the board by number. So we'll start with 1 and end with 8. Normally, unless a particular festival card is played, and it might reverse the order. But normally that, you go in the sequential order there, then you actually go to resolve the activities. Now how they are resolved, so if anybody was here, they would just, so what is it? We'll just go on each, go in order with each activity and explain each one. And when it comes to where there's more than one piece, we'll explain how then you figure out who gets to go. So this first one, if somebody were there, they would just take the first player token. So, right, that's how you can then secure that for the next round. Anyone who goes here, so it could be, multiple players. It could be one player has both, maybe they didn't know what to do. They put both their pieces here, then they would gain 10 fame. But this is just a way to get some fame. It's usually not the most lucrative thing to do. You're usually better off actually brewing beers, but sometimes maybe towards the end of the game, you might have an extra action here and there. And that's, advertising is a good way to secure some additional points then. So you just straight up get points if you go there. Now, the third spot, these are interesting cards. So you go here, and when you resolve an activity, you just take it back, and you would, in this case, you draw your festival card. These are kept private, and so there's a varying amount of those, or there's actually 7 different types. And they affect gameplay in a variety of ways. And I think I'm going to hold off on explaining how these work until we get a better idea of the other activities. But I just want to lay these out and show you what they are for the time being. Yeah, and so I think that's the last one. Yeah, so that should be one of every one of them there. So that would be if you go to 3, and you could put both your player tokens there and draw 2 of them. So that would be how you acquire these festival cards, and the connection card you would reveal right away and place face up in front of you, but the rest of them you keep to yourself, and you can play whenever the relevant is. So there, it tells you on the card when you can play it, and from that point forward, when you draw it, if it's applicable, you can start playing them. You can play any number, as long as the time where it says it's applicable is the case, you can then play a card as soon as you have it. So activity 4 here is acquire upgrade. This is how you can improve your brewery and kind of your beers in general, right? So it's actually a way to improve the scoring in some sense of all 3 of your beers. Now I should say here at the outset maybe that, so this is your brewery. I could have mentioned this. And so this represents your brewery, and each player then has 3 taps that they have access to. So throughout the game, you can brew up to 3 beers. And you can tinker with, let's say that I already have 3 beers. That doesn't happen a whole lot, but let's say I did. You can go within, when you go to the activity 7 here, you can go and sort of tinker with a particular beer that you already have. But in general, you're sort of capped at 3 beers. Again, a lot of times you might only focus on just having one really good beer, or maybe a couple. That's oftentimes the case. And then your upgrades are also indicated on your brewery board. So that's what we selected here. And how do upgrades work? So I can either take the face up one or draw the face down one. Let's see what we have here. Just take a chance here. Of course, it doesn't really matter. They work the same, all 3 of them, in the sense that you can upgrade each of the 3 different types up to 3 times. And so what this means is every beer that I brew from now on is going to be worth, since I have one of these, 1 point more. As soon as I get a second staff card, every beer, not just one, every beer is going to be worth 3 points more. If I get a third staff that upgrade, then every beer would be worth 6 more. And so you can see how if you really upgrade your brewery, you can quickly and significantly improve the quality of all of your beers. Of course, that's going to take an investment in terms of your actions. right? But so again, that is that spot. And so there's just, this deck is just those 3 different types of upgrades. Now I should say, so these cards over here, these are kind of not really, I mean, if you lump them together, it's kind of a small expansion, I guess, but basically it's just something you can add to the base game. And basically they're just like wilds. So you can, this one applies to the upgrade deck. You can mix these in, right, with this, and they're just wild. So you can, whenever you acquire one, you could apply it to any of the 3. And now it's like I have 2 staff, right? So that's how that works. And then going on to 5 here, it's the same sort of thing with these gurus. They just count as a wild on the research. So speaking of the research, I'll take our action piece back here. So blue went to research, so they retrieve this. They can draw the top one from the face down deck or select any of the 3 face up cards. And basically, that's another way to earn fame over the game. It's kind of, you know, capturing your sense of expertise in the microbrewing industry, I guess you could say. So blue says, okay, give me phase 1 here. And there's 6 different phases in the research corresponding to the 6 different phases of brewing beer. And so again, this is an example of a game you might say is educational, right? In terms of the scoring at the end, so you will earn scoring for your research at the end of the game. And the way that's worked or figured out, and so you can see how that was sort of adjusted over play testing. Oh, and we would draw a replacement then once that's resolved or was taken. But so at the end of the game, you're going to get points based on the number of research cards acquired of the same type. So if if the blue player were able to acquire at least 3 or more of the phase 1, so they really became an expert in malting, I guess is the idea, right? Then they're going to start acquiring fame. So if they can get 3, they get 20 fame. 4, they get 30. And if they can manage to get all 5, I believe there's 5 of each of the 6 in there, then they would get 40. Now remember, if you do add the gurus, those can be substituted for any of the phases. And then you also would get points for the different types of the research that you have done, right? So if you had 4 different types throughout the course of the game, let's say they'd acquired 3, 6, and 4. All right, so voila, they had 4 different ones. Then they're going to trigger 20 points. Okay, so that's how 5 works, and again, you would replace those. Now, this is where a lot gets done, where we acquire the ingredients. So the ingredient cards are, you know, a main component in the game. So this is how we acquire the ingredients for our beers. So you might have noticed we've come to a spot where more than one person is. Well, how do we resolve who gets to go first? You'll notice as well that there's always 7 face-up ingredients, okay, on offer. And then there's you can always draw the one on the top as well. Now, what I was trying to look at is when exactly these are replaced. I believe it is at the very ends, right? So there's kind of a race, right? If there's really good ones up here, everybody's gonna be trying to go there, and you want to try to have the first pick because, you know, once somebody takes that coffee. And 3, with the exception of super secret ingredients, 3 is basically the highest value for an ingredient. So when you see those 3s, there's going to be a lot of like a race for them. So, you know, how do you figure out who gets to pick first? Well, it's actually not first player is not the first thing that determines it. It's actually this connection. So there's 6 out of, like, I don't exactly remember how many are in the festival card deck, but let's say 30. I know that the frequency is there's 6 of these connection cards. So let's say about 20% are going to be these connection cards, and that there's this resolution order in the game. This determines the resolution order. So we're in the activity resolution phase, right? So if there's more than one person trying to resolve any of these activities, we have to consult the resolution order. And so again, it's not first player, right? First player always selects activities first in that first phase. But when it comes to resolving these, you actually consult the resolution order, and that's determined by connections first, then first player. So if someone, let's say we had acquired this connection card, then we would actually get to pick our ingredient first. So let's say that was the case. We're going to secure these. Anytime you see special ingredients, those are usually, again, something you want to try to snag. So we'll go ahead and put that on. Start brewing, start putting together our first beer here, okay? So we put it there. Now we haven't brewed this beer yet. We couldn't score points for it or anything. When we do brew this beer on tap 1 and it comes to scoring points, this will be worth 3 points. It'll add 3 points to that beer's sort of score. Okay, so now we would take our action selection piece back. We have blue and green left. They don't have any connections. So then it would go to first player and go clockwise from there. So since green has that, they would go and they would take, let's say, they really liked one of these waters. Maybe not the average quality water from your kitchen sink. Maybe instead that high quality water. Okay. And they might add that there. Now, let's talk a little bit more about brewing beer, since that's such a key integral part of the game. So I'm going to put that back and pretend they took something. Actually, I want to leave these up here. So how does brewing beers work? Actually, I'll talk about what you need to brew the beer here in a moment. First, though, let's go through these ingredients in a little bit more detail. You'll notice you have what are called essential ingredients. What the heck? Let's combine it with the brewing here, right? What do we mean by essential ingredients? Essential meaning that to brew a beer, right? So you're putting together all these ingredients on one of your taps. Now you're ready to brew a beer. Well, are you ready? You would actually have to satisfy 3 conditions. Every beer must have one and only one of these 3 ingredients, right? So those are going to be essential ingredients: water, malted grain, and yeast. Additionally, there's another essential ingredient, hops. But with respect to hops, you can actually have more than just one hops, right? With these, you can only have one water in each beer. You can only have one malted grain. You can only have one yeast. But with hops, you could have like 4. Okay, now there is another parameter here, and that's that you actually can't exceed 8. So what's the most you could have? What, 5 hops? So you could have those 3 essentials, and then just have the rest going up to 8 right, all hops. You could do that, okay, in theory. Now I don't know that I've ever seen that happen, but so that's what you kind of have in view when you're building or brewing these beers, I should say, right? Now you don't have to have 8. You could try to brew a beer real quick, especially in year 1. There's kind of a race to get a beer out on the market, you might say, because there's yearly awards at the end of each year. So there's going to be less competition earlier on because it's, fewer people are going to have brewed beers. So if you want to race and, get a quick one brewed, you might only have the 4 essentials and brew that beer, But anyway, so that's kind of what you need. So then you'll notice when it comes to essentials, the yeast is always worth 2, and it's either top cropping, I should say, in which case it's an ale, or it's going to be bottom cropping, which I have examples here somewhere. Oh, there it is. So, right, that's how you distinguish and get a lager versus an ale in the game, and it's supposed to represent, how it really works in real life as well, right? So you're going to need a yeast, right, and only one yeast, whether it be a lager or an ale. Then you're going to need a water, and you'll notice the water cards actually come with a bonus condition as well. So it's going to score you this, plus if you satisfy this extra condition, then you can get 2 extra points. And each one has a kind of unique way to trigger more points. We talked about yeast, water, what else? So there's hops is one of the other essential ones. And remember, you can have more than 1 hops, but notice how water comes in varying qualities as well. So average is 2, low is 1, and high is going to be worth 3. Same thing with hops. Okay, notice how they're worth different amounts. Okay. Now we also have what are called adjuncts, and you'll notice, so with respect to hemp, there's low, average, and high quality for each of these. So there's 3 hemp ones, there's 3 corn ones. Okay, so again, players, when they see the higher quality ones of anything, they're gonna really try to get those. So like, for example, here's a high quality adjunct. So here's another example, right, of one of the 4th one that we haven't talked about of the essential ingredients, and that is the malted grain. Now this is what determines, right, what I guess in some sense, other than the ale and lager, sort of the color of your beer and the kind in general of the beer you're going to be brewing, right? So that's based on this, I don't even remember what that stands for, but SRM, that's some sort of beer brewing term. Again, I had to look into all this 10 years ago or whenever it was I made this. But so you're going to need to add, right, a malted grain to your beer as well. So over the course of the game, you're going to be adding these, right, to your board. And what else do we need? Hops. Let's get some premium, high quality hops on board as well. And so you're, again, anytime you can get some special ingredients, you're going to try to get that. Now, one of the things, I was kind of alluding to these, so these are essential ingredient tokens. My buddy Dan, during playtesting, he suggested, I feel like there's times where I just can't get I'm looking for malted grain and I just can't get one. I can't find one, one doesn't seem to come up, or whenever I see one, someone else snags it in front of me. And so I struggle because I can't seem to brew the beer then because it's required. And so he said, what about, if you threw in, call them essential ingredient tokens or whatever, where they had minimum value, but then they could still satisfy that requirement. So that was an example of one of the things that was tweaked, again, in this game over the years as a result of play testing. And so you can go here, and if you don't like, let's say, anything that's on offer there, you could always draw the top, or you can take this, if you really need whatever and you can't seem to get it, let's say a water, and that way, and you can only have one essential ingredient token per beer that you have, or per tap. So you couldn't get 3 here to try to satisfy the 3. And so let's say I didn't have the water here. Okay, I could still brew this beer because I have all the other essential ingredients. Now this would just count as 0, right, in terms of the scoring. So it's not going to improve the quality of your beer at all, but it will help you at least satisfy that minimum requirement. And you still need to go here to acquire the essential ingredient token. So I kind of already talked about the brew beer then activity, right? But you actually have to go there then during one of the activity selection phases of a round to then brew a beer. Okay, so then you would say this beer has been brewed. And so what that means, right, so you're kind of taking it to market. And actually, I should have mentioned, you wouldn't actually be laying these out, right? So this is when you would say, I'm brewing a beer, and you would actually reveal these. Okay, so they wouldn't be actually put out there yet, right? So that's how you indicate, okay, I brewed the beer. So that's tap 1. Tap 1's beer has been brewed, right? And again, you have to go there during the activity selection part or phase of the round. The last thing players can do, let's say somebody had gone here, is if you have a beer on tap, again, another reason why you might want to race just to get a beer done, because maybe you could satisfy, right, one of these early competitions. But so here, every round, you're going to have a different competition. And so here we have, and players know at the beginning of each round, because this is going to be, a new one's going to be drawn, they're going to know what competition is up, what they can compete in that round. And a lot of times there'll be 2 different places. And so what this is basically saying, whoever's gone there and entered the competition and has the highest quality beer, in other words, whatever beer of the participating people has the highest score, and you just add up again all the points there. And don't forget, right, you would also include this beer is actually +3 then because of the upgrades. You would compare, and it would have to satisfy, though, it's not just any beer, it has to be a brown beer. So its malted grain would have to be 20 to 29. I don't know if that's the case. Whoops. It is. It's a dark brown, so we could actually enter that. Okay, and if we had 2 beers on tap, we could actually go there, a player can go there twice, and they could possibly win both, right? If they had the top 2 brown beers of people that entered. Okay, so, and if you win that, then you take it and you put it face down, and so you can see there's the trophy there, and so you'll accumulate trophies over the course of the game, hopefully, right? Maybe you want to show it like this. However, right, so you're gonna have a certain number of trophies, and then that's one way at the end to, at the very end of the game, to score even more additional points then. So once we've resolved the competition part, then that's the end of phase 2. When we just do bookkeeping. So we would, flip over another one here. Okay. We'll go through the festival cards here in a second. We would make sure that has a face-up one. Go through and make sure all these. We would fill these back up, etc. Then we would move, right, would be in the second round or the summer of year 1. And that would be basically it. We would go through then and start round 2 or start the summer of year 1 doing the same thing we did in the first round. So, obviously you're going to be acquiring more ingredients and you're going to be able to brew these beers then as you get further along in the game. I meant to show this one. This is the best in the game. All right, it's top secret and it's worth 5. So there's, I think, 3 of these, or there's a very small amount, maybe 5 in the entire deck. So they're rare, and so certainly a race to get those. But let's talk real quick about the festival cards, because these definitely mix things up a bit. So you can throw a Brewmaster on any of your beers, and it's just going to increase the value of that beer +5 for the remainder of the game. Now Joker, this is the most situational card for sure in the game. It's the most context dependent. Oftentimes it's super weak, but if played at the right time, it can be super powerful, because basically what it does, you play it right before the action resolution phase. So after players all have their tokens out here, right? And you're about to go then and resolve them. Whoops. Somebody plays a Joker, boom. And what that does then is it's gonna reverse the order. And what the trick there is, and that can really screw people up, because they might have been depending, let's say, right, one of the players saw that I was needing, they knew, right, maybe, or sensed that I needed still this water to be able to brew then the beer that I want to brew here. They might reverse the order. And so thanks to that, then I won't actually have the water I need to brew the beer. So this will just be a wasted action. So that can happen. There might be some other instances where the Joker might be effective, but that certainly can throw a wrinkle into other players' plans. The Crook here, you can take 2 random ingredients from any one opponent's hand and pick one of them, add it to your hand, and return the other one to them. Industry Rep, so when it's your turn to acquire ingredient action, or to acquire an ingredient, you can reset the ingredient supply market. So you basically just take anything that's still left there and discard them and then draw new ones. So that can be pretty useful if you don't like any of the stuff that's out there, if it's low quality. The Hobbyist lets you exchange at any time. It's your time, and it can be when you're totally somewhere else, right? Whenever it's your time to resolve one of your actions, you can exchange one of your ingredients in your hand with one that's face up on the board, or you can just discard one from your hand to draw one from the deck. So that can be pretty good as well. Connoisseurs, these are nice. You just keep these in hand. At the end of the game, they're going to be one of the ways you can earn points. Those are all revealed at the end of the game. There's a certain number in the deck, and they're worth 15 apiece. I think that might be all of them. We talked about the connection. There's a lot of those. Okay, that's determining the resolution order. So that's Microbrewin. So at the end of each year, I should say, actually, I forgot. So you go through these 4 rounds. Now, the end of the winter is a little bit different, because you actually then conduct yearly scoring. Okay? Each player scores his or her highest beer. So you might have 2 or even 3 beers brewed, right? But you're only going to get points at the end of the during this scoring for your highest one. So you would, again, move your score accordingly. Then you'd score awards. There's always 5 awards handed out at the end of each year. So this will happen again 4 times throughout the game. You have your best lager, best ale, best light beer, and best dark beer, and those are all worth 5. And then, regardless, there's no requirements, right? Just the best overall beer, all right, is going to earn 10. Now, you could, right, make a super, I was going to say powerful, but a really, really good beer early on, and it might be the case that it wins multiple awards, right? That first year, and maybe even the second year, maybe the third year. So the same beer could earn you multiple awards year after year. Just now, that would be kind of hard to make a really good one early on, but again, that's possible. And then the last thing you do is you do get further recognition based on where you're at that moment. You might get a little extra bonus then in terms of fame. So you do that, right? And you do that as well at the end of the fourth year. But then additionally, in addition to the yearly scoring, you then go to the end of game scoring, right? And in this case, if players had second and third beers, they would also get points for those. Of course, they already scored their best beer, right? Then they would get their second and third if they had them. They would get points for that. Here's where you would then get marker points for your research that you've done, which we talked about earlier. And then, you would also players would reveal their connoisseur festival cards, which we talked about. Those are worth 15. So this one, right? You would reveal those. And then you would end with some additional awards. Again, no points are awarded ever if there's ties. Okay, but we have 2 additional awards worth a little bit more here, 15 apiece. Right, and so the most research, whoever has the most research cards is going to get 15, and whoever has the most competitions, whoever won the most competition trophies, is going to get an additional 15. So at that point then, you'll have done 4 yearly scorings and an end of the game scoring. And at that point, then you compare fame, and whoever has the highest is the winner. And if there's a tie, it's whoever has the highest quality or beer that scores the most points, basically. I'm just trying to remember. So this game, I really like it because it is very dynamic, including the scoring. Sometimes you can have, just because there's such crappy ingredients, you might have really low scores across the board. Sometimes we've had really high ones. I was trying to remember if I remember anybody ever getting to global, and I don't think so. I think I remember some mid to high 200s. Apparently I scored 257 at one point. But basically all I have in the folder here is just some playtesting notes and scores and whatnot over the years. But that's Microbrewin. Again, one that's been played quite a bit over the years. Okay, so let's conclude part 5 with a discussion of a couple of my most recent designs. I'll kind of get into, you can see again what it looks like literally when I kind of put these things together for the first time. See my notes, maybe some of my kids' doodlings as well here and there. But again, I'm going to talk a little bit about, to close this part of the episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of my designs that neither one of them I've wrapped up yet, although the first one, Divine and Conquer, is almost done versus Gamers. It's, I have the general idea and gist of the game fleshed out, but I haven't completed the rules and haven't actually created the components. But both of them I consider kind of almost fully fleshed out in terms of how the gameplay would work, and what the rules are going to be like. It's just, again, a matter of time, right? Getting that time to actually get it put together. So first, Divine and Conquer. I was trying to, this has been, I wish I should have looked into it, when I first started actually making this game, but I would say it's probably been 3 years ago at least that I started putting this together. So that's the one with this. So I want to say it was kind of inspired by Magic the Gathering. I've always kind of thought in the back of my mind, here's an earlier version of that, by the way. Maybe this is the later version since it doesn't have things crossed out. But I always thought, I've played Magic the Gathering for quite some time, and in the back of my mind, I always thought that it should have had another color. Not that it was really lacking. I mean, great game, but where's yellow? And not that was like the whole reason or inspiration for this game, but I got yellow in there, and it's also similar to Magic the Gathering. There's a lot of similarities, I think. You get the colors, and each of the colors have some symmetry with some of the surrounding colors and are antagonistic mostly to the opposites, and so you're putting together a deck, but of course, certainly, different in many respects as well. This was inspired, my daughter has always been keenly interested in like Greek mythology and, various gods and so on, and so it was like, and I kind of remember talking to my son in the early development of this game, like it would be cool, to put together a game about gods. Not that hasn't been done, by designers before. There's games out there about gods, but kind of like a Magic the Gathering sort of game and vibe, with different sort of emphases. Each of these colors affects gameplay in different ways if you focus on it. But then also, that emphasis on like gods, so some of those same sort of gameplay feel of like Magic, but combined with, these various gods of these various mythologies. So it incorporates. So part of like putting this game together entailed, where is it? I did a ton of research on like these various mythologies. I talked about how educational some of this stuff can be, some of these games, and that process of designing games, how educational that can be for me. This just speaks to it. So here's some of my notes still. I went through and looked into like these various gods associated with these various mythologies, and then based on kind of what they were known for, associated them then with what most corresponded to the gameplay of these various colors. So, Aries, well, he's going to be red and aggressive, right, and so on and so forth. And so what's interesting about this game, I think, is that it's a deck builder, but it's not like infinitely expandable, right? You start with, I think it's like 90 or something like that. I can't remember, maybe it's slightly more because there's 7 different colors, but they're 15 times 7, whatever that works out to. What is that, 105? So those are the cards that are in the game. In addition, then you also, right, will put together sort of your starter deck, which are just basic colors. Anyway, so there's that sense in which you're working with the same pool, and there's a couple available in each color at all times in the game. So you're trying to like build up. Maybe you're emphasizing red, and so you start with like basic red resources, fire, and so you use that fire then to usually get things from the fire region, right, and cards that specialize. What are some of the red cards, right? You might get fine crafted automatons. So and then that will go into your deck, and then you can use that to not only buy or acquire more red creatures or whatever, but then also go to these various locations and attack then the monsters, right? That's the way you're gonna get them points. So there's various monsters that appear, and depending on sort of what you play at these various places, you might get bonuses, right, if there's certain colors with the correspond to these locations. So for example, the plains is associated with the white color, desert is with yellow, forest with green, and so on. So there's like synergies in that sense. I didn't want to get too involved in my discussion of either of these particular games, but this game, one of the things in terms of bringing it to a wrap that I've kind of been just wrestling with here at the end is kind of how to, and it speaks to some of the design issues in trying to make them publishable, because there's these 7 different elements, and I want to have various cards available at all times for each of the elements, right? That's going to require certain table space, and meanwhile there's these various locations, 7 of them to be precise, that correspond as well to these 7 colors, and so that's going to take up table space. And so over the years I've tried to sort of whittle that down to being manageable, and that's been a real difficulty with respect to this game. Everything else has been kind of easy going, I'd say, with respect to this, but and I've worked it out slowly throughout the years. But I started off with the idea of fighting more monsters at each location, but it occurred to me that's too much. You can't have 5 at each location. It's just going to be too much table space. You're already dealing with 7 different locations. At most, you can have 2 or 3 monsters at each one. So that's just a sort of glimpse at kind of some of the design issues I come across here and there as I'm putting these things together. Really try to, again, have an eye towards what someday, at least when I pursue this more, probably when the kids are out of the house, what would make them most likely to be published, because I do have a lot of confidence in the designs themselves. All right, for the most part, it's just getting the components a lot of times this to be manageable and most affordable from a publisher standpoint, right? And let's be honest, most profitable is the word really from a publisher standpoint. And that's, again, as I've mentioned, right, I've generally gotten better and better at that. But this one, there's just, again, it was particularly problemsome, is that a word? Difficult, how about we go with that, in that regard, because there were those 7 elements that I wanted to stick with in 7 corresponding locations, each with their monsters at them and cards available to expand your deck and so on. So that is, I guess we'll wrap up our discussion of Divine and Conquer, and I'll probably show you more of the details in the videos there, or in the video, right? Some of the details with respect to some of the cards, right? And, the math involved and how each of the colors are slightly different and they have different sort of gameplay emphases. Anyway, I'll move on to probably a briefer discussion of another game that I've been working on. It's my most recent one. It's called, at least tentatively, Gamers. It's not as fleshed out as Divine and Conquer. And really the only thing, I've got most of Divine and Conquer figured out, other than, again, trying maybe whittling down even a little bit more table space. And then also the duration. I forgot to talk about this, but how to have the game actually come to an end. I've tinkered with a few different ideas for Divine and Conquer. I think what I'm going to come up with, or what I've decided on, is kind of you have this, I'm going to have some fancy word for it, like the star of colors or whatever, and it's going to have like a certain number of pieces. It's almost like a puzzle, and each time a player goes, they put one of the pieces right on one of these colors, and it'll trigger certain benefit if they do certain things with that color or something like that. And then when the last piece is put on there, then that triggers the end of the game, something along those lines. That I have to flesh out and maybe tidying up the table space, but really otherwise the game's finished. Gamers, not necessarily the case, although I do have a general sense of how the game works. So Gamers, what is it about? It's basically captures my love in some sense of board games. In particular, you're like a gamer like myself and you amass a collection. You go to various board game conferences and maybe you make purchases, right? You add to your collection. The whole idea is you want to try to become, right, have the best collection basically, which is then going to garner you, say gamer points. I'm not sure what it'll ultimately be, right? But the idea is you want to get garner the best board game collection possible. So how the game works is like, it'll be like, let's say, I want to say like 4 years long, let's say. And so this is one of those, right, where mostly it's fleshed out in pencil and paper here, but it's going to go, it's sort of in order. It'll start with, sort of event 1 will be a spring board game conference. And so you can go to that conference or not. You can acquire, if you go, then you acquire a certain number of, you can acquire a game there at the conference. First one there might get a handout, a freebie. So you're acquiring these games. One of the ways then you can acquire games is by going to a convention. And so you have certain, each year you will have a certain number of action tokens that you place at these various things. So that's what determines what you're going to end up doing, right? So you might have planned to go to the spring convention. So if you do, then you'll probably acquire a game. It's going to cost you a certain amount of money. You get money at the beginning of each year. There's certain other ways to get more money and probably get better games then. There's also a thrift store, which you can visit, and games that don't sell originally at the online vendors or the local friendly gaming stores, they go to the thrift store and you get them for much cheaper. Just some general ideas of how the game works. But anyway, right, you go through then these various different events. Event 2 is one of the online vendors has a sale. And so if you put one of your action tokens there, then you can get one. I shouldn't say necessarily they had a sale. They have certain ones on sale, but if you put your action token there, you can acquire a game, whether it's one they are selling at a new price or if it's a one that's on sale. Then you have a summer convention, and then another online vendor, and so on and so forth. And you have an auction towards the end, and then you have certain awards that are handed out at the very end, and then you'll go through the year again 4 times. So that's the general sort of idea. And part of the process then is kind of flushing out the different conventions, right? And which one's the most prestigious, and how the conventions will work going there. What will the people that go there, what will they get? How will that work? Will somebody get something better if they go there first, or how exactly will that work, right? And then friendly online gamers friendly local gamer stores and online vendors, how do those work? And then the sales and thrift store, right? I fleshed all that out. And, a lot of that was there. Me doing that. I can barely talk now. And then, I have to come up with so which games do I want to include? And so that's part of the process. And I tried to stick with mostly the most well-known ones and kind of tweaking their names. So one of my favorite games I've talked about, right? Terraforming Mars. I included that. It's Terrorizing Mars. So there's these various games. So gamers will appreciate that and like that, right? Maybe they can't afford some of these games in real life, or you can't possibly get all the ones you want. And this game allows you to kind of get that sense of really putting together the best collection possible. And if you can't normally afford, or for whatever reason come across a copy of Terrorizing Mars, this will be your opportunity, right, by way of playing gamers. At least that was my idea. I kind of like the idea. Of course, I'm a gamer, right? I love these games, obviously. But this might be a game that isn't necessarily one that speaks to people in general, right? But definitely, I think other gamers will obviously be able to relate and get into this one. So I think that's all I wanted to say about gamers then. So that wraps up my discussion of my 2 most recent sort of designs, and trying to give you a kind of look at how it's been constructing them, putting them together. And that'll wrap up part 5 in general. Again, we've taken a look not only at my most recent designs, but some of my favorites of all time, so to speak. Some of them are philosophy related ones. I talked at the beginning in general about the design process and my history with respect to it, and what it looks like for me, and how that's maybe changed a little bit over the years and so on. So now we'll move on to part 6, where I'll talk more about one of my favorite designs, one of my better designs. We'll talk about it more, American Numismatist, number 13 chronologically. We'll talk about it because I'll be discussing in part 6 submitting that game in particular to the 2010 Rio Grande Design Contest in Milwaukee. So that's what's coming up next.